Hey guys, welcome to another MSI Insider live stream. I'm not alone here. Well, I'm alone at this desk, but as you can see, Peter is right around the corner.
I'm here.
So looks like he's sitting next to me, but he's not physically. So today we have another AMD live stream. We also have some fans from the AMD community right here, so welcome to all of you as well. We're going to talk about several topics today. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what AMD AM4 CPUs are available at the moment, but also we'll talk about the new Renoir APU that was actually released yesterday. We will demonstrate it as well later on in the stream. We will have Martijn from AMD. He will give us all the ins and outs of this new Renoir APU. And then in the end, we will talk about motherboards and different chipsets. So we will talk about B450, B550, and X570. And we will explain to you in what situation you should pick which chipset, basically. And also what you should look for if you go for a certain CPU, because the combination of the CPU and the motherboard is extremely important with especially AMD AM4 platform, because there are quite a lot of different chipsets and different CPUs out there nowadays.
Correct. And if you have any questions like specific situations or recommendations that you want to ask about, go ahead and ask them in the chat. Either Martijn or Mike will try to answer it as good as possible.
Yeah. And we will also have a very nice...
I also heard that we have a really nice giveaway.
A really nice giveaway. Let me show you right away, because we will give away two things today to one lucky viewer who will win them both. And it is this motherboard and this all-in-one liquid cooling. So it's the MAG B550 Tomahawk motherboard together with the MAG Core Liquid 360R water cooling, which is of course a 360mm radiator. So if you want to win this combination, go to msi.com/2/insider. You can participate several actions there. The more actions you perform, the bigger chance you will have to win. We will also do several drawings for a Steam wallet code. Those will be $20 Steam wallet codes, and at the very end, we will draw the big winner who will win the MAG B550 Tomahawk motherboard and the MAG Core Liquid 360R water cooling.
Exactly. So pretty much all you need then is just the right CPU.
Exactly.
Which is exactly what today's stream is about.
Exactly. So then you already know what CPU you need on this motherboard with this water cooling.
Yeah, there you
go. So maybe let's talk a little bit about CPUs.
Yeah?
Yeah?
You want to go to...
If we can go to the slide, then we can shortly talk about this. Different one? Yeah, that one. You might already be familiar with the new Matisse XT CPUs from AMD. I think 2 weeks ago when I was on a holiday together with Ja, you already did a live stream about this, right?
You were on a holiday together with Ja? I didn't know that.
I wasn't. I think Ja was with you. Or we lost him somewhere, I don't know.
No. I'm pretty sure he was here.
But I think you did a PC build stream for streaming, basically.
Yeah.
So we stream about streaming.
Okay, so we tried to build the streaming PC of tomorrow, like future-proof kind of thing, indeed. So and we had at that point a really brand new, I think it was a 3800 XT that we had in there, the RYZEN 7.
The RYZEN 7.
Yeah, and it was a pleasure to build it. It was quite easy in the end, and the performance was really nice, which we showed as well during the stream. So
yeah, and especially if you do something like streaming, then of course the 8-core 16 threads of a RYZEN 7 3800X XT in this situation really helped. So let's talk a little bit about the XT CPUs.
Yes.
For the ones who have missed this maybe. On the 7th of July 2019, AMD released the 3rd gen AMD Ryzen CPUs, codenamed Matisse. Exactly 1 year later, the 7th of the 7th of 2020, they released, it's basically a revision, slightly higher clock speeds. They released 3 versions of it: the Ryzen 5 3600 XT, the Ryzen 7 3800 XT, and the Ryzen 9 3900 XT. So there's still the Ryzen 5 is a 6-core CPU with 12 threads. Ryzen 7 is 8-core, 16 threads, and the Ryzen 9 is 12-core, 24 threads. But they have a slightly higher boost speed. So if we look at the total product build-up, basically, the product stack of the Matisse CPUs from AMD. We now see the 3 new models, how they compare also with the other models. So when you, for example, compare the 3600 XT to the 3600X, then you see that the boost frequency is 100 megahertz higher. For the 3800 XT compared to the 3800X, that's even 200 megahertz. And for the 3900 XT compared to the 3900, that's 100 megahertz as well. Another change is that the 3800 XT and the 3900 XT do not come with the CPU cooler, whereas the regular X versions, they do. And the main reason for this from AMD is, of course, that many people who buy, well, it's basically an enthusiast-grade CPU. Yeah. They tend to use better third-party cooling, like water cooling, like all-in-one liquid cooling that we just talked about, for example. So basically, if the cooler will not be used anyway, why include it?
No point, indeed.
Yeah, exactly. And this also means that the CPUs have the same price as the regular X versions. They're just higher clocked and do not come with a cooler. So it's a bit dependent whether or not you want a CPU cooler with your CPU, which one you should pick. And of course now in the stores, the prices for the XT in the beginning will probably be a little bit higher as there are already bigger discounts on the regular X series. Also because they've been on the market longer now. So if we look at the performance of these CPUs, in this overview, you can see the average frame rate of different games that Tom's Hardware tested. So we borrowed this graph from them, this table. You see how they relate to each other, and you can see that for gaming, single core performance is important. So you see a small increase in frame rate in basically every situation of Ryzen 5, 7, 9. If you compare it to the regular X version, they're all just a little bit faster in gaming, give you slightly higher FPS. If we then take a look at the single core performance in Cinebench, you can also see that the single core performance of all these CPUs increased compared to the regular X model. So they're basically on top here. It's a very good single core performance.
Quite of course, a nice bump indeed.
Yeah, this is of course very much based on clock frequency.
Yes.
So here you can really clearly see the speed bump that the XT models got compared to the regular X model. When you take a look at the multi-core performance, there you see it's closer to each other. This is of course very much bound on the number of cores that the CPU has, and a slightly higher FPS will have a small impact here, but nothing significant. And if we take a look at the power draw, also quite to be expected. It's clocked a little bit higher, so it will consume slightly more power. Yeah. But the 3rd generation AMD Ryzen processors are very energy efficient. So still very doable to run this even in a relatively small system. Also the TDP was not raised compared to the previous models. So like the X models, the XT models also have a TDP of up to 105 watts. And of course, you can get beyond this with precision boost overdrive, etc. Yeah. AVX, stuff like that.
Yeah, TDP is a topic that we maybe want to address at some point anyway, because a lot of people still think that the TDP number is like a set number that applies for everything, and then basically it just tells you what kind of cooler you need, and that's not always the case.
No, it can be a little bit confusing.
Yeah, but the reason it's confusing is also why we can't just give you a really simple explanation now. So we might have like a different stream where we, try to figure everything out for you, and then see if we can explain it as simple as possible. But,
and even though 2 CPUs can have the same TDP, the power consumption can still be very different. And it's not like if the CPU has a 105 watt TDP with certain workloads, certain techniques like precision boost overdrive, it can go well beyond that. But of course, in return, you get more performance from it.
Exactly.
So yes, you can definitely max it out at 105 watts. You can set that in your BIOS settings. Yep. But of course, then you will miss out on performance. So probably that's not something you want to do.
Exactly. Anyway.
Then the XT series, of course, they're slightly faster than the previous generation, but still they're basically the same CPUs, just slightly faster. But yesterday, AMD launched the new Renoir APUs. So these are CPUs with integrated graphics, and this is extremely new. So we invited Martijn from AMD to join us today to talk a little bit about this. So we have Martijn on Skype.
Let's see if he's
grab
still
my
there.
earphone. Let's see if he's there.
Hello.
Hello.
I hope I am. Hey guys.
You
yeah,
are.
I can see you.
How are you
I
doing?
hope everyone can see and hear you. Doing good, doing good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much.
Good.
Quite busy with the new launch?
Oh, it's been crazy busy, obviously. There's a lot going on lately, and obviously we're super proud to have introduced the world's first 7nm X86 desktop processors with built-in graphics yesterday. And I think before we go into a bit more of a deep dive into those parts, I think it's understandable that we elaborate a little bit more on how we position high-performance Ryzen with or without graphics. I think for your target audience as well. I mean, if you're looking for the world's most advanced technology in high performance, you obviously need a Ryzen. If you're an enthusiast and you absolutely know 100% sure that you would want a discrete graphics card for that extra push, whether it's gaming or content creation workloads, you would actually want a Ryzen 3000 series desktop CPU. But for gamers, creators, all-around PC or business users who simply prefer a pre-built desktop system with integrated graphics, you will want a Ryzen 4000G series CPU. And by the way,
yeah, so later on we'll also have like a demonstration. We have two setups, one with the 3000 series you mentioned with a dedicated graphics card, and one with one of the new APUs, the Renoir ones.
Yep, that's great. So yeah, and still, by the way, if you go for that pre-built system, you still have that opportunity to upgrade later down the path because it's built on AM4, right? Which is has shown that you can still upgrade from that as well. So before we go to the next slides, I want to elaborate a little bit. A large focus of AMD as a company is to grow in the OEM space and into the commercial space. Targeting them first is very important for us to grow and to enable us to continue to create these amazing products. And while the AMD Ryzen 4000G series desktop processors will initially be available exclusively for pre-built systems, we do understand and appreciate that some DIY customers may be eager to have a next-gen APU in their system. While we cannot discuss all the specifics of our future roadmap, obviously, we do want to ensure that DIY users, we will still offer an upgrade path for both AMD 400 and 500 series motherboards down the line.
Okay.
So I wanted to get that out of the way before we deep dive into the specifics of Renoir.
Yeah, that's quite an important thing, right? Because right now it's not possible to buy a separate APU based on the 4000 series, so the Renoir APUs.
Yes, this is only for OEM partners and commercial system integrators for now.
So in pre-built systems, that's where you will find them.
Yes, and this is exactly where we need to focus as a company to allow us to grow in that segment. Obviously, with the success we had in consumer and DIY, the enthusiast gaming market with RYZEN these last couple of years, it only makes sense for us to grow in that space as well. So hence the focus is there right now.
Okay.
So if we then move on to the next slide, I can show you the plan we have for 2020 is to widen the net by making 7nm and Zen 2 parts high performance accessible to even more people, right? So a big portion of the market is in that OEM and commercial system integrator space. So earlier this year, we launched new Ryzen 4000 series mobile processors, as you might know, which are bringing amazing responsiveness, performance, and efficiency to laptop users for both consumer and commercial. And what the record-setting Renoir platform, as we all know, as a Ryzen 4000 series, isn't actually just about laptops. So we made that available now on desktops as well. And when creating those 4000 series, we envision a robust platform that would power both 10-watt laptops all the way up to 65-watt desktops. So a complete family of Ryzen 4000 series products available, whether it's through mobile or in desktop systems.
And it's quite interesting to see because like we have 3000 and 4000 series, but like the CPUs, so the Matisse CPUs we already had for the last year, those are Zen 2 architecture. And here, like the APUs are basically together in numbering with the mobile, right?
Architecture or generation behind, I would say, and this time we are pulling or leveling that with the actual parts that are CPUs without built-in graphics. So we take all that greatness of the Zen 2 architecture and have that built in in our Ryzen with Radeon graphics built in right now. So it's a lot of where the obvious performance increase comes from, of more than 2.5 times the performance of the previous generation APUs. It's up to 60% more performance per each AMD Radeon graphics core as well. So it's not just increases in CPU performance, but also on the graphics side of things. And this is all thanks to that being built on AMD's optimized 7nm and Zen 2 architecture. So that was the obvious step for us to take.
Yeah.
And then, so we were excited for the next chapter in AMD, making that high performance accessible to as many people as possible. And today we'll be sharing you our latest mainstream consumer and commercial high performance Ryzen and Ryzen Pro desktop processors with Radeon graphics, because we also have a Pro segment in here, specifically targeted at modern business desktops.
So they are really for business to business use, to be used in a working environment.
Exactly, and for anything else but gaming, I would say, and for anything professionally or office oriented, whether it's small business, frontline office, frontline commercial, large enterprise businesses where you have IT managers, managing a couple of hundreds of systems where you have your employees work on, these Ryzen Pro parts are going to be the perfect fit for those systems.
And maybe they're not made for gaming, but I tried it a little bit, and you can game quite well on them.
Of course, because there are some of the business users that actually demand some 3D performance as well, and actually in real life, tools and applications that you use nowadays, like PowerPoint, for example, having a faster built-in graphics actually has you some gains in how fast that program responds. For example, if you're doing complex things in PowerPoint. So those are just a couple of examples for real world scenarios, I would say. But the Ryzen Pro is obviously more focused towards security features, manageability, and seamless deployment when you're extending or growing your business, for example, and you want to extend your current offering in PC or in desktops in your environment. But we'll start by looking at the consumer parts first today. So if you go into the actual stack, then you'll see we have the Ryzen 5 and 3, as you've already known from the APUs from the 3000 series generation. But there is something new here as well, as you might have noticed. We're widening that net now with Ryzen 7 as well. So
also Ryzen 7 on APU, so Ryzen 7 with integrated graphics.
Exactly, so an 8-core 16-thread part now with built-in Radeon graphics as well. So you now have the opportunity, to build a system that is very, very powerful on the CPU side and very powerful on the GPU side without having to go out and purchase that discrete graphics.
So in terms of performance, this will be comparable to a Ryzen 7 from the 3000 series. So like the 3700X, as we know it, will be relatively similar in CPU performance because it uses that same Zen 2 architecture, right?
I think the word relatively is correct. And it's the same architecture and same 7nm. So what you've come to know and love from Ryzen 3000 or 3rd Gen Ryzen is basically what's happening here for the 4000G series on the CPU side, at least. So yeah, correct. So this means we're not only showing a 4-core, a 6-core, but also 8-core models this time. So we got basically something for everyone. And as you expect, from Ryzen, these are incredibly powerful, yet equally efficient 65-watt processors. But at the same time, we're also offering low power options through 35 watts to our OEM partners, but also for B2B, to build those even smaller form factor systems.
So for example, the very small PCs that sometimes you can even put on the back of a monitor, stuff like that.
Exactly, and if you if you want to have that in let's say a presentation room or something where you don't want to have a separate desktop sitting there and you want to mount it behind the back of a TV or a beamer or some other solutions, then you can easily do that, especially with a 35-watt solution. And it's an amazing product lineup basically with even more amazing performance. So if you go to the next slide, you can actually see generation over generation, but also compared to what's currently available in the market, what these processors are capable of on the single thread, but also on the multi-thread part, but also on the graphics side of things. So we will look in a moment specifically per CPU, what they are able to deliver generation over generation. But as you know, AMD has led the industry in the graphics side of things for quite some time with the Radeon brand. And in recent years, thanks to the incredible power and efficiency of our Zen core architecture, we've also taken a leadership position in the industry for multi-threaded performance, as you've seen in 3rd Gen Ryzen launch. And with the Ryzen 4000G series, we're actually now in that leadership position to have single thread performance leadership as well. So across the board, in every key performance metric, Ryzen wins, whether it's single core, multi-core, or graphics performance. And what's more, this remains true for the entire 4000G series, leadership performance across Ryzen 7, 5, and 3, as we'll show you in the next couple of slides. But before we jump into those details on each specific processor, we also want to highlight that we have introduced some new Athlon processors as well, the Athlon Gold and Silver models, basically to distinguish and make it more clear for entry consumers, a clearer differentiation so they can easily choose the performance they want for, let's say, a more affordable solution, a more entry-level solution. And these ranges from 2 cores to 4 cores. But as I said, that is not all. We also have Ryzen Pro 4000G parts, perfect for business desktops. And I want to thank you guys for this opportunity to, deep dive a little bit more in the B2B space, I would say. I know this is not what you typically do on these live streams. Your target audience is a little bit different, obviously. Your viewers might find this quite new for them for the first time to hear this, but it's very interesting for them and for everybody to know that if you are planning to build a system, whether it's for family, friends, or for professional use, whether it's in the office or at home, anything else but gaming, these Ryzen Pro 4000 series processors are basically the next best thing. And if you then go to the second slide for this Pro segment, you will see that obviously for modern challenges, for modern IT challenges, we needed to identify 3 key pillars for any business to help us shape basically these 4000G Pro parts to cater to any small business, frontline commercial, or large enterprise business cases, whether it's through productivity, obviously leading in performance, whether it's through security, more and more important nowadays. And as you can see, especially in the B2B space, obviously, this is more of a key feature rather than in the consumer space, but also for seamless deployment for any business needing to upgrade their systems or extend their current IT lineup.
We have a very nice comment in chat by Forza E2. He's saying, can you guys say thank you for Martijn for that old MSI overclock video? I still use it as base model for my current CPU. So for people who don't know it, Martijn actually used to work for MSI.
Yes.
And there he also made an overclock video, like a tutorial basically.
Not just one.
Yeah, several. Yeah. And but people still use it nowadays.
I think one of your most popular videos still is the ClickBIOS 5 walkthrough. That thing is still going like millions of, well, not millions, but
many views.
A lot of views.
One can dream, Peter.
Well, anyway, we're not. It's not done yet, so
yeah, exactly.
Who knows?
What's on the internet stays on the internet, right?
Exactly.
So I remember those old days when I started in IT. I've been building PCs since I was 13, 14 years old. I was also first looking towards how do I configure BIOS, etc. So it's interesting to see that a lot of people and a lot of new enthusiasts getting into this whole DIY space and start building themselves are still looking for that same kind of information. So I'm happy to have provided that, and I'm glad that it's still a very popular video.
Yeah.
So can we get back to the topic at hand?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think you have quite a busy schedule today, right? So
yeah, we do.
Yeah. So let me quickly browse through what was left on the Pro section, basically for those B2B processors. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see exactly why we're launching those 4000G series, both in consumer and commercial. It's power efficient performance, as you've seen in those key pillars for productivity. The 4000G series are up to 31% faster than the competition, but it's also a breakthrough in power efficiency with up to 43% more performance per watt this generation. The most advanced technology, 7 nanometer Zen 2, obviously, and security, which I'll go into a bit more detail later, because that's one of those key features specifically targeted at B2B, obviously. So let's take a look at the stack in the Pro space. Here as well, you also get that nice Ryzen 7 Pro 4750G and GE. So that is also available in a 65 and 35 watt TDP. It's an 8-core 16-thread part up to 4.4 gigahertz. So a a lot of performance to be had from a single CPU. And I actually have its little brother right here, which is the Ryzen 3 Pro 4350G and GE. I'm not sure if you can see it. It should be, yeah. Because I'm already testing that Ryzen 7 in my test bench, so I didn't have time to take that off the bench just yet. It's just so addictive having all those benchmarks testing and trying to optimize that, right? And as you said, you can even overclock that a little bit, but that's not the target audience for these CPUs.
Our in-house overclocker also fiddle around with them a little bit. We'll talk about that later as well, because they're quite impressive actually at overclocking.
Yeah, there's a lot of performance to be had for these parts. So yeah, you can see why we're so excited for these Ryzen 4000G series parts. But as you can see, it's a nice follow-up to our Ryzen 3000 series parts, our Ryzen 5 Pro 3400G and GE, and our Ryzen 3 Pro 3200G and GE. But as you can see now, the last generation 3000 series top-end part was a 4-core 8-thread part. This generation, the entry-level Ryzen 3 part is actually already a 4-core and 8-thread part. So again, we're increasing that level of performance even from an more entry-level perspective. So we're widening the horizon for anybody looking for whether it's an entry-level or the most performance without having to pair it with a discrete graphics card. Let me move to the next slide. I think that makes sense to have it seen into our current stack, basically, where these processors would fit.
So also including, for example, the Matisse CPUs, the 3000 series.
Yeah, what you can actually buy
CPUs.
from e-tailers, right? What you and your viewers are typically looking for when building gaming rigs, productivity, or just day-to-day use PCs. You will typically go for the ones in orange, which is either a Ryzen 9 all the way down, ranging to an Athlon 3000G, anything in between that. But as you can see, from those parts, we actually already have for quite some time also got Ryzen Pro parts in the 2000 and 3000 series available, where you can pair that with a discrete graphics. So if you're looking for anything but to do with rendering, you might consider a Ryzen Threadripper, which is perfect for that. But you can also pick a Ryzen 9 Pro 3900, for example, and pair that with a strong graphics cards to do that workstation workload as well.
Important to mention here, so the Threadrippers, they are, of course, they need to be combined with the TRX 40 chipset motherboard.
Correct.
And well, basically everything below is AM4. So both the CPUs and the APUs, they both use the regular AM4 socket as we know it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what that means is basically in whatever you choose in AM4 now, you still have an upgrade path down the line. So that's what I said in the beginning of this interview. Basically, you can still choose to, if you go for a 4000G series right now, but later down the line you want something else with a discrete graphics card, you can simply swap either plug in a graphics card or swap out the CPU because you want that more cores and more threads, even more than 8 cores, for example. You can still swap to a Ryzen 9 Pro 3900 easily as well, whether it's from a business perspective or a consumer perspective.
And also in the future, the Zen 3 architecture, of course.
Exactly. This is also what we've highlighted in the future. For future products, we will make that compatible as well. So it's a nice upgrade path, and I think AM4 has definitely shown what we are capable of into supporting future CPU generations. If we go to the next slide, then you can actually see a bit more generation over generation performance leaps. I know we've talked about single thread, multi-thread from what is currently available on the market. But I think it's nice to sit back and see and have a look a little bit at what we actually did generation over generation. So single-threaded side, if you take the top-end part from the APUs on the previous generation, which was the Ryzen 5 Pro 3400G, and you compare that to this generation's Ryzen 5 Pro 4650G, you can actually see on the single-thread performance we've increased with 22%.
So this is Picasso compared to the new Renoir.
Yeah, so basically Zen Plus versus Zen 2, and obviously 14 nanometer against 7 nanometer, that also helps. But a lot has gone, improved under the lid to have that performance increase into your hands starting yesterday, actually.
So now the leap that we saw last year on regular CPUs without integrated graphics from the 2000 to 3000 series, we now see a similarly big leap from the 3000 series APU towards the 4000 series.
Yeah, and then that's where you can actually see where it starts to make sense, right? To level that as well with the Zen 2 architecture and 7 nanometer, especially in that OEM and commercial space, where they tend not to build systems, pre-built systems with discrete graphics, right? So we want to enable them to have the latest and greatest in CPU performance and technologies, as well as what we can do on the built-in graphics side to deliver that fast performance as well. So that's where you can see all the way down to the right. You can see the performance increase also on the graphics side of things. Generation over generation, Ryzen 5 versus Ryzen 5 is actually 6%. But if you take a look at the Ryzen 7 Pro, and that's mainly due to the fact that the internal graphics card has actually gotten a nice clock frequency increase as well, you can see a performance increase of 19% over the previous generation. So that's quite a lot.
And this is quite interesting because in the previous generation, for example, the Ryzen 5 3400G actually has 11 compute units, whereas the Ryzen 7 Pro 3750G, for example, has 8 compute units, but still it outperforms the 11 compute units part because of the way higher clock frequency.
It's the clock frequency. It's obviously moving to Zen 2 and 7 nanometer. That also helps. And the way these CPUs are built up, these are both monolithic designed rather than a chiplet architecture. That also helps reduce latency, of course. So that also has effect on memory performance, which is tied to the actual built-in graphics performance as well. So there's a lot of performance to be gained through those architectural changes we made and the way these CPUs are basically built up. Yes.
Yeah, so we have also been testing with these APUs, of course, and we also tested this with several memory speeds. So later on, I will also show a comparison of what your DDR4 memory speed, so your regular RAM, means for your graphics performance of your CPU.
Yeah.
And that also has to do, because I was a little bit confused, like it's only 8 compute units in the new Renoir series, so that's less than in the previous generation. So I expected it to be slower, but in fact it's faster because of the higher memory frequency, but also because of the higher frequency of the internal integrated GPU itself. Yeah. So that's quite interesting to see how with fewer compute units you still can get more graphics performance out of it.
It just says a lot about the efficiency and the performance of those units, obviously.
Yeah, and
I got a question in the chat, by the way. Somebody's asking, whoa, the 4750G is up to 150% more than compared to the Ryzen 5 Pro, the 3400G.
Yeah, that's on the multi-threaded side. So obviously, 4-core 8-thread moving to 8-core 16-thread has that advantage. So yeah, there's a lot in the multi-threaded department. Should you need that, then obviously the 4750G Pro is the perfect part for that.
Exactly. But it's just, somebody was mentioning it, and it's just, to give it a little bit of context, it's more cores, more threads, and on top of that, the single core.
Zen 2 and 7 nanometer also has some play in that as well, obviously. Yeah. And what you see is typically with these systems, obviously with the 4000G series, we're supporting DDR4 3200 megahertz, as Michiel also mentioned. There's a lot of performance to be had pairing it with the right memory as well. I think as you mentioned, you will show a little bit later as well, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Then moving on to the next slide. So going into depth on the Ryzen 7 Pro 4750G, and then looking at what we see as real world performance in the B2B space, in business desktops, where you
common programs that are used
applications that you use on a daily basis, or nice comparison benchmarks like PCMark, for example. You can see a lot of performance increases generation over generation, and then you see whether it's Ryzen 7, whether it's Ryzen 5 or it's Ryzen 3, it's similar improvements all the way down the stack. And that is obviously, if we go to the next slide, due to the fact that we have improved Zen 2 architecture, 7 nanometer, which basically allows us to run at lower temperatures and silent operation for any business as well. But it also allows us to draw more performance from the CPU and be more power efficient at the same time. So with all that in place, it is the perfect fit for small form factor business desktops, obviously. And with everything else being equal, this high efficiency processor can enable lower total cost of ownership at the same time as well. So that could be if you're running 100 systems in your office, in your company, a lower power bill actually is also a nice way to earn back money, right?
I see a question from Edwin K. Will the performance increase on the G processors when overclocking, or is the turbo already the overclock?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that?
Will the performance increase on the G processors when overclocking, or is the turbo mode already the overclock?
Can you still overclock them, or is the turbo mode the overclock in the G processors?
Yeah, basically, can you still overclock with them?
You can overclock, but it's different than the consumer parts. Obviously, there is, as far as I know, no PBO, for example, those configurations. So you have to do manual multipliers, etc.
So PBO, precision boost overdrives, like the automatic overclocking.
Yeah. So, but I'll need to double check on the specifics on that, because I actually haven't really overclocked these a lot yet. Because these I'm trying to understand as well as to in this business desktop space why this makes sense, and we're obviously focusing more at the security features, manageability, and so on. So
it's not built for this, is what you're saying, and I guess we can understand that. But I mean, that's not going to stop people from trying.
Of course not, no. But as you can see, most IT managers will lock down the BIOS, for example. Yes. So I believe you have the same when you're using your MSI laptop at work. You cannot enter the BIOS, start overclocking, for example. This is similar to what most IT managers do in a company as well. So
yeah, exactly.
But of course, if you have a motherboard without limitations on it, like the boards that I have in front of me, yes, you can overclock this, definitely.
Yeah,
but you have to know what you're doing, obviously.
Yeah,
and
of course.
To be completely honest, we're not limiting anything on the chipset side of things or in the CPUs, right? So it's all down to the motherboard manufacturer, which model, but it's also down to the IT manager in the end, what he's going to set up in his office, in his company. But there is no limitation on it. But it's definitely not the focus.
All right, cool.
So that power efficiency and that lower total cost of ownership that we are trying to enable, obviously, you can see that all the way trickle down to Ryzen 5 and 3 as well. That's Zen 2 architecture at work. You know, similar performance increases ranging from 18% to all the way to 53% faster generation over generation in day-to-day applications. So I think a huge performance increase going through a new series.
And that's actually the one we'll have here today for demonstration also, the Ryzen 5 Pro 4650G.
Yeah, that's a very good choice, and we believe that the majority of the market will also target those as well. So if you then go to the Ryzen 3, it becomes a little bit repetitive, but the performance increases here generation over generation is quite spectacular. Obviously, it also has to do when you typically look at these applications, these are lightly threaded. Not as much multi-threaded, so if you throw in a Cinebench comparison, you would obviously see a higher performance increase generation over generation, or you use other heavily threaded applications, you'll have more benefit moving to the new 4000G series.
The big Yes is asking in chat, so for whom is the new chip targeted at?
I saw this.
That's a good question, and it's exactly one of the next slides. So why do we have Pro, obviously? So the Pro Advantage is already starting from the first generation we had, and then the second, and now Ryzen 3000 series, all to boost modern productivity, to leverage that AMD architecture, but also have that AMD secure processor, which is at the hub of the actual hardware and of the Zen architecture, to enable businesses to not only have the fastest processors available, but also have a high security as well. And what the Ryzen 4000 series Pro products actually add to that is more AMD Pro security, more and easier AMD Pro manageability, but also more and easier AMD Pro business ready features, which we'll dive into a little bit later. But this is where you can actually take shape that these are definitely targeted at office and product professional use, I would say.
Yeah.
Amar is asking no PBO for the new APUs. Is that for all APUs, or is it only for the Pro models?
I'm not sure. I think it's only for the Pro ones. I think previous generation on 3000G parts we did have PBO, and that should continue on the 4000 as well, but I definitely need to double check on that.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we move to the next slide, then you can see one of those key pillars that we focus highly on, which is obviously AMD Pro security through our modern architecture with Zen 2. We represent a new standard with improved security features, a layered approach actually, and security features, those are designed from the ground up with endpoint protection starting at the hardware level. So it's actually security built in from the hardware itself, from the silicon itself. To go into more details on that is the next slide. You'll see that layered defenses actually in the picture. And that's where you see on the bottom, you see your data is being protected through multiple layers. So Zen 2 is architected with a focus on security features to withstand today's sophisticated attacks. As you can see, lately, there's more news about vulnerabilities being discovered more often nowadays, and Zen 2 is making sure that you are protected from the hardware level on that. It includes a dedicated secure processor that validates code before it is actually executed. So this AMD secure processor is actually at the hub of the RYZEN Pro processor's architecture, helping ensure applications data integrity. It integrated on the chip to reduce additional points of attack. And then AMD Memory Guard also on top of that. If we go to the next slide, I'm not sure if you've skipped that one. I'm still seeing the Pro Security one.
And we now have layered defenses.
Yes. Okay, yeah. So
you're watching the stream at the same time, so that probably has a bit of a delay. So
yeah. Here I was saying that you have multiple layers of protection basically to ensure that we are delivering the most secure processors we can create. So if you go one slide further, you see actual AMD Memory Guard, which is one of those features, and that is actually managed by the AMD secure processor. Memory Guard fully encrypts system memory to help protect your data against unauthorized access, basically. So this prevents also against brute force memory dumps from someone with physical access to your system. Maybe he's stolen the system, or you lost something. It can happen. So anybody with physical access is actually unable to brute force any memory dumps and get that data from your system.
Yeah. So if you work with sensitive information, then this is quite an important feature.
It's not the system itself that's causing the most damage. Obviously, when you have a system reported stolen, it's the actual data being pulled from that system that's creating the most financial damage, basically. Let alone that sensitive data being out there publicly. That is definitely something you do not want. So with AMD Memory Guard, we have memory encryption through AES 128 bits. To ensure that that memory definitely is not being able to have brute force memory dumps of data. I think one of the last ones on security to highlight here as well is that we also closely work with ecosystem partners. One of them is obviously one of the bigger ones is Microsoft, and they are a tremendous source, obviously, of feedback, but also helping us and enabling us for more advanced threat protection from their end. And ensuring a flawless operation of our security features as well through AMD Memory Guard, our AMD secure processor, for example, and the implementation of a Zen architecture. So what you've seen last year, for example, with those threat awareness updates we've had on the consumer side to boost performance, this is also typically what you'll see on the security side, where we are closely working with partners like Microsoft to ensure the latest security mitigations are in place.
I see a question in chat from Dafix. I've thought of a semi-intelligent question. Is AMD working in the shadows to create a massive single-core speed jump for future CPU?
Ooh, wow.
I'm not sure if Martijn will already talk about it.
The whole thing, you're already saying, are they working slyly in the shadows? If they are, there's a reason for that, and they're probably not going to talk about it. But it's a good question nonetheless.
It's a good try, at least.
It's a good question, and it's a good try, and obviously we continue to, passionately work forward to a next generation of architecture where we can have similar, if not better, jumps in performance from moving from Zen to Zen Plus or Zen 2. With Zen 3, we're obviously very excited to see what that comes into fruition, what it actually delivers in terms of performance. But yeah, talking about future products and future roadmaps, that is definitely something I won't do today. Sorry.
Was a nice try. Was a nice.
Yeah, it was a nice one. Well packaged question.
Yes.
So moving to the next slide, you can actually see enterprise-grade manageability. So we talked about security, obviously. And one of those key features, especially in a company with a lot of systems, is to have a single IT manager managing, let's say, hundreds of systems from a single desktop, right? So we enable that through AMD Pro features. AMD manageability through Dash, which is an open standard. It also benefits from the fact that it's an open standard, that a large following actually uses this. A lot of big companies actually use the Dash support as well. And this means you get a lot of feedback in that same pool. So it's not something you rely on because you use proprietary technology. You can only rely on customer feedback or your own findings. For example, we benefit from that large pool of feedback as well. And one of the highlights here as well.
Question in chat. I think that will be answered to you very soon in one of the following slides. Does the 4000 Pro series support buffered ECC memory?
Yes, we can, and we will show you.
There you go.
Good question. So you can manage both. We will touch the ECC in a while. Exactly. We can manage both AMD and other brand PCs in that same space, which is something unique as well. And we will also work closely with Microsoft Endpoint Manager, for example, and other tools that are allowing the use of open standard manageability tools, which AMD supports. So you're not tied to a single solution to have manageability on the IT floor, so to speak. So you can mix and match AMD systems with other branded systems as well.
Garen is asking, is AMD going to make CPUs smaller than 7 nanometer? Nice try as well.
How small can you go?
Question towards a roadmap, I'd say. But yeah, it definitely depends on what the future brings through our partners, TSMC, for example, obviously. And
usually it always gets smaller. It's just a question when.
But also, how small can you go? I mean, at some point, maybe it's like physically impossible to get smaller to still make it work.
There are a lot of great technologies being developed and being researched right now. Obviously, moving from the way processors are currently being produced towards different EUV solutions, for example. But a lot of different technologies. But how and when that comes into fruition into AMD products, I honestly wouldn't even know that. So
I see Neolinks are already making a prediction. 3 yotometer, let's go. Nice.
Yep, that's a good one. So we'll definitely look forward to what the future brings in terms of process nodes, obviously. But to be fair, I won't even know the answer to that question now. Yeah. So we talked about security, we talked about manageability, and then obviously the last step is, is it difficult to enable these AMD Pro systems into your business, right? If you have already running other brand systems, actually it isn't, right? Through that manageability, which allows you to both manage AMD and other branded systems, that is the easiest step forward. But we also have similar features to seamlessly deploy AMD systems, and that you can guarantee on at least a long duration of time for image stability, whether it's through software, OS. If you make images, you obviously down the line, if you're looking to increase the number of systems in your pool, you can simply rely on that same image 18 months ahead, and then simply enable more system with a fast deployment as well. And that same goes for the hardware itself. So the AMD Pro processors typically are available at least 24 months of planned availability. We definitely see the same thing happening on the motherboard side of things through a lot of our motherboard partners as well, with the more commercial-oriented solutions being available a tight bit longer than the regular consumer boards. Obviously, because companies rely on the availability of the same model for at least some more time. They do not switch that often as as the enthusiast audience does, obviously. And then we have enhanced QA through quality assurance and validation processes. Even more quality checks are in place from the RYZEN Pro CPUs compared to the regular RYZEN, I would say, consumer CPUs. This actually starts already at the drawing board, at the blueprint phase, all the way down to the end of life phase of the actual products. And this can be what you can relate to as ESD protection, ESD testing, most extensive thermal testing, etc., but also quality of the silicon testing, multiple probes in the production line itself to ensure the highest quality standards for these pro parts, even higher than our consumer parts. And this obviously results in, the highest reliability we can offer for any processor out there. I think that's about
Question in chat: will the Ryzen 3 4300G be better than the Ryzen 5 1600AF or Ryzen 5 3100?
That's an interesting comparison. However, you know, that's the first generation Ryzen 6-core against Zen 2 parts, 4-core 8 threads.
It depends a bit on where you're looking at. If you're looking for multi-core performance, then the 6-core part will probably still beat the 4-core part, but in single-core performance, the Zen 2 architecture part will always beat, in this situation, the Zen Plus architecture part.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is you can now choose, right? I mean, if you're looking to build something with discrete graphics, then you might not look at the 4000G parts, but you might look at the 3000 parts, obviously available right now. But if you choose to go for the 4000G, as I mentioned in the beginning, and still, you know, rely on that integrated graphics, but later down the line, you want to pair it with a very powerful graphics card, you can simply upgrade to that and still use the same CPU or swap to a different CPU. There's always
and
options.
when we look at the AMD Pro versus the consumer series, so if you have, for example, the 4600G versus the 4650 or the Pro 4650G.
Yeah, exactly. So the great thing here is that the architecture, Zen 2, 7 nanometer, etc., is all the same. Anything you've come to know and love, anything you've seen in the media, in reviews, you've read about Zen 2, 7 nanometer, about AMD Ryzen in general, you'll see that both available in AMD Pro and AMD Consumer. There is no difference in that. Both also have the AMD Secure processor, and both have now got a 3-year limited warranty. So we used to have only a 2-year limited warranty on consumer side, but with the actual quality of Zen 2 and 7 nanometer, we were so happy with it that we've decided to also make the consumer parts a 3-year limited warranty as well. So those are overlays now with the AMD Pro parts. Where the differences are is actually mostly in those security features, availability of course in longer duration of time, but also that feature and connectivity consistency, whether it's from the CPU, the boards. Typically in the consumer space, you'll see more revision 2 boards being released where some slight changes might happen in connectivity. Obviously on the consumer side, it's very important to keep those connections the same for anybody using multiple input devices, whether it's a drawing tablet or something to create work on, basically do projects on. It's very important for them to maintain that same feature connectivity consistency through our partners, through the chassis that they use, but also through the motherboards. And then that same commercial quality, obviously we have high quality standards for the AMD consumer parts, but we go even to more extreme lengths on the commercial parts.
Yeah, so if we compare that here, for example, also ECC comes in, right?
Yeah, that's one of the next slides actually. That brings us to the motherboard comparison, because this was looking from the CPU perspective. If we then go into the motherboard perspective on AM4, what we typically see on AM4 motherboards throughout our partners is that they support both forward and backwards processor compatibility, both on consumer nowadays as well as commercial. But the AMD manageability, supporting Dash, for example, it really depends on on a consumer model. But most AM4 commercial models actually support it. I believe you also have a model supporting it on the B550. And then ECC, yeah, that's typically a feature that you mostly see on commercial boards, right?
Good question by Cat7NB. What is ECC?
Yeah, that's error code correction. So basically, your memory is validating whatever is loaded and checking, double checking basically the data, and yeah, it becomes a little bit slower, but it's your data integrity, and it's a lot more stable compared to a regular memory module, I'd say.
Yeah, so basically an extra level of
error
making
code
sure
correction. That's the
everything
name.
works and is stable.
Stability is very important, especially in that professional space. Obviously,
yes.
you would hate it if you would work on a project for several hours and then you would have some kind of error, whether it's the application crashing or even worse, a blue screen or something, and then you throw away all that, that effort that you put in that project. That's something you definitely do not want, especially on a consumer, on a commercial part. So. Then commercial quality we touched on, similar for motherboards. We typically see that as well, more extensive testing, more extreme testing, whether it's temperatures, EMI, ESD, etc. It's great to see that same commercial quality is also thoroughly tested on the motherboard side. And then in line with the CPUs is also that extended availability I mentioned earlier.
when we take a look at the complete AMD Ryzen Pro 4000 series stack, I think there's still the frequency of the boost. How is it still so close from the 37 or the 35 watt part compared to the 56 watt part?
What you'll see, I'm not sure which slide you're looking at right now.
Ryzen Pro 4000 series.
Yeah, that's typically because most of it is down to the base clocks being a little bit lower. That's how we save energy most of the time. You will typically find a couple of cores boosting, obviously, to that max boost frequency. That is less power hungry than having all the cores run at a higher base clock. So that's typically what's going on.
Yeah, so we talked about the different CPUs within the Pro series. Of course, we'll do some demonstrations as well. Anything else that people should really know about Renoir?
Yeah,
I see many people asking about the price and when can we buy it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, at this point, it's not available as a separate part, so you will only be able to buy it as a
Go check your favorite commercial system integrator partner, your favorite OEM for pre-built systems based on Renoir. Whether you're starting to use it as an office PC or gaming, there's always a solution available through our partners, so that should be okay. I think for Renoir, before we jump into the whole motherboard details, which I think you and Peter will touch on, I think it's important to know that 4000G series products will work on 500 series chipsets, not on 400 series chipset.
Yeah, later on we'll talk about extensively when can you use which type of motherboard or which CPU. Yeah. Let's do one last question before we go on to the demonstrations. Triggered Soul is asking, what's the difference between the G and the GE version?
Yeah, the GE version is the 35 watt low power version of the same CPU, which is the G version, which is normally the 65 watt. And typically you'll see the base clock being slightly lower.
So the E is for energy efficient or something?
Yeah, exactly.
So Martijn, thank you so much for explaining Renoir to us. And now we're going to fiddle around with it a little bit because we have it in front.
Actually, I dug up something I had myself. I'm not sure if you can see it. So I actually have that same motherboard you're about to test as well, and I actually took it for a spin a while ago, and I was so excited to see the performance to be had from these 4000G parts. So I'm going to predict that you guys are going to be amazed and excited as well.
Yeah, we also have a Ryzen 5 3600, so we will run them next to each other to see how close they actually are.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're super similar in performance, of course, both Zen 2 architecture, which you can now also get in APU. So Martijn, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, and good luck with the rest of the stream. I'll be checking your performance results.
That's good. We'll be playing around with this.
Stay on the line, because if we get problems or something, maybe you can help. No.
like the hotline.
Just file a ticket. Sorry. Hey, bye guys.
Hey, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I see my system went into hibernation, so I hope that it doesn't crash the stream if I put it back on, because that sometimes happens with our capture method.
Yes.
That's the downside of energy efficient measures. Let me see if I need a screwdriver to boot it back up.
Oh yeah, because it's a very bare bones setup.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, this is I think what we call like do we call it a bench setup or something? I don't know.
Yeah, demonstration setup, test bench.
It's just a very quick, easy way of.
I'm just booting this back up. If it doesn't disappear, then it's good. Still okay? We're still up?
I think so.
Okay, let me also switch the monitor, because that one.
Let me just quickly check our dashboard to see if everything is still up and running. It looks like it.
I think we're back online. You guys saying open bench? Yeah, open test bench. That's basically it.
We know Martijn is watching us. Trust us, we can still see it. We can feel it actually.
I'm quickly going to switch the energy saving features off, so we don't
get a repeat
of that again.
Yeah.
Go to sleep. Never.
No.
Thank you, computer. Okay, now let's play around with it a little bit, because right here we have two setups.
Before we do that, should we make, because we're like an hour in, should we do one giveaway?
That's a good idea.
Yeah?
That's a good
Before
idea.
we forget, because we shouldn't forget.
So if you haven't participated yet, go to msi.com/2/insider and participate. Right now we're giving away $20 Steam wallet code, but at the very end of the stream, you'll be able to win the MAG B550 Tomahawk motherboard together with the MAG Core Liquid 360R all-in-one liquid cooler. So make sure to be signed up. So there will be one winner at the very end winning both of these components. Right now we'll draw our first winner for the $20 Steam wallet code. Ooh, that's
I'm trying to get the name right, because it's kind of like a tongue breaker, I think. Or
so you're going to try? Good.
Yes, yeah, I'll take this one. So our first winner is
just building the tension.
Ilka Refendi.
Can you repeat that?
Ilka Refendi. I'm
sorry, what did you say?
I hope I pronounced that correctly. But congratulations on winning the Steam $20 voucher. We'll get it out to you as soon as possible. And yeah, do something nice with it, or not.
Yeah,
really
keep an eye out on your mailbox. You will receive it in the coming days.
Exactly. Cool.
So let's play with this.
Yes.
So what do you want to see? I have several benchmarks installed.
Damn. Maybe should we switch to the capture and?
Yeah, let's take a look.
So you want to do side by side or start with one of them?
Yeah, let's do side by side.
Yeah. All right,
maybe we can do. Oh, we can still not see.
I see
it.
one side is dark. This one's not doing.
Yeah,
so
that's
well.
the one that went in power saving mode.
Oh no! All right.
It should be working. Can you try to select it again?
Yes. Maybe I have to.
We're trying to fix it so we can capture both.
Wait. What's going on?
So I think maybe we can start off, if everything works, just with a straight CPU power comparison. So on this side we have the MPG B550 Edge Wi-Fi motherboard, gaming Edge Wi-Fi motherboard. On this side we have exactly the same motherboard, but here we have the Ryzen 5 3600, so a Matisse CPU, 6 cores, 12 threads. Here we have the new Ryzen 5 Pro 4650G. So that's also Zen 2 architecture, 6 cores, 12 threads. So basically on the CPU side, these two should be very similar also in terms of performance. The main difference between these two is of course that in this CPU it has integrated graphics, whereas in this one we're now using a separate RX 5500 Gaming X GPU. I
saw people joking that I turned the dark side and we should just turn off dark mode. That's fine.
So,
but I think it's working now by the looks of it.
It looks like it's working.
There we go.
Let me boot up Cinebench R20 on both of the systems. So you will see them side by side. So you can see the score on both sides in the end, and you will also see them running towards them. So I will click them at the very same moment in 3, 2, 1, run. And yeah, these scores, they should be quite close.
Should be, but let's see if they are.
Also, you can
find out.
Like you can only see one half of the screen, of course, but you can see how fast they are compared to each other. Each block is a thread rendering, and you will slowly see the image emerging.
There we go.
So it's starting in the middle. That's why you just see it now.
Yeah. And in the end, of course, on the top left, you'll be able to see a score.
Yeah. And you can already see that they're rendering at a very similar pace.
So guys, place your bets now. Go on.
Yeah.
Which one's gonna win?
John Paul says 3600 can do it.
Yeah.
Can surpass 4650, just my bet. They should be relatively close to each other, and I think if you would run this 10 times, maybe one would win 5 times, the other one would win the other 5 times.
Yeah. But to be fair, there's a difference in capture method, right? So one is actually running OBS and capturing through NDI, and the other one is being captured through direct.
But this one, on the other hand, has Steam running, and the other one hasn't, because later on we will also do a little bit of gaming on this.
But just to be completely honest and transparent, there are some variables here that could influence it maybe a little bit, but
that probably the APU will score slightly higher because it's not running NDI.
Yeah.
So if we see the score, 3611 points on the APU, the 4650G, and 3517 on the 3600. So if you look in the overview on the left, you will also see that the 3600 normally also scores in the 3600 points, basically. Actually, a good match with the name. In the 3600 points for a 3600. I never even thought about that, but
maybe this is like they meant to have it this way.
I think so. Yeah.
Do you think the AMD engineers like intentionally made it?
But I
so
think
that
the
it
3700X will do a little bit more than the 3700.
Well, that's true.
And the 3900X will do a little bit more than.
So it's just a lucky hit.
Yeah, it's just a lucky hit. The 3600 does into the 3600s.
All right. Well.
But yeah, as you can see, they're extremely similar in score. The 3600 is now a little bit lower because we're running NDI to capture the screen for you guys.
Yeah.
But like in terms of CPU performance, the difference between the new 4000 series APUs and the 3000 series CPUs, they're extremely similar. Of course, the same Zen 2 architecture, also the 7nm process. So yeah, on the CPU side, very similar.
Handblocks, we only had one winner so far, and that's for a $20 Steam code. We still have the big giveaway later on this stream at the very end. So if you want to have a chance to win that, stick with it and find out who wins.
Now let's take a look at a difference. Because as you know, Matisse, the 3000 series CPUs, they support PCI-Express Gen 4. Of course, you need a compatible motherboard with that, so you need a 500 series motherboard. So either a B550 or an X570 motherboard, whereas the 400 series, but also the older 300 series, they will only support PCI-Express Gen 3. And especially for storage, this makes quite a big difference. So in this situation, we're running the new Renoir APU. That one does not support PCI-Express Gen 4, so that's something important to note. If you're going to use this APU with, for example, the RX 5500 that we have here, so if you would use it with a separate graphics card, it will also run in PCI-Express 3.0 mode.
Yeah.
But this also means that the SSD
is going to do the same thing.
Yeah, because both of these systems are equipped with this SSD to be exact.
Do we need to have a close-up cam or?
Yeah.
Here we go.
So this is the Seagate FireCuda 520 SSD. It's the 500 gigabyte model. Let me quickly show you up close. So this is a PCI Express Gen 4 SSD. And they're extremely fast, and basically they're too fast for the PCI Express Gen 3 interface. So this will do higher speeds than you can get through the Gen 3 interface. So we put this in both the systems to compare what this means for your storage performance.
Yeah.
Let me just put them both in the middle so you can see both of them.
Yeah,
so both of these systems
That's also,
are
by the way, you might see some color difference in the colors, like the background, but also the green of Crystal Disk Mark between my the one on my side and the one on Mike's side, that side.
Yeah.
That's down to the different capture methods that will affect the coloring a bit. So anyway,
yeah. So
let's see some speed.
Yeah, exactly. So in both of these, we have the FireCuda 520 Gen 4 SSD, but of course, the CPU, the 3600, it supports Gen 4, whereas on the new Renoir, the 4650G,
the one
that
on
one
Mike's
will
side.
run. The new one will run at Gen 3. So if we compare this in terms of performance,
then
we will do both the read and the write speed. The write speed of these SSDs does not go beyond the basically bottleneck of Gen 3, so that they should be relatively similar. But in read speed, you will probably see a big difference.
All right.
I can already guess that.
How do we win the SSD? Yeah. Class Savage is asking.
Sorry?
How do we win the SSD?
Oh, I'm measuring the wrong SSD actually. How about that? Let's stop it. And
oh my god.
These are just the SATA ones that we currently have Windows installed on.
Mike. Is this your first time?
Okay, so here you see SATA speed, 500 megabytes per second approximately.
Okay.
Just for comparison's sake. I didn't forget to select the right one, okay? No one saw that.
We'll delete this part. No, wait, this is a live stream.
All for comparison.
Yeah. He meant to do that.
So here you see the big difference in reading speed. On the Ryzen 5 3600, supporting PCI-Express Gen 4, Gen 4 SSDs nowadays can get around 5,000 megabytes per second reading speed, whereas on the PCI-Express 3.0 interface, you'll always get bottlenecked. It doesn't matter how fast the SSD is, at around 3,500 megabytes per second. So that's also the speed you will get from very high-end Gen 3 SSDs. If you use a Gen 4 SSD, you will not get more out of it because it will be bottlenecked by the Gen 3 interface. So very important, if you want to use a Gen 4 SSD, if that's something that's important for you, then you definitely need the 3000 series CPUs.
And it's mostly the read speeds, right? Because I can see the write speeds are actually
this depends a little bit. This specific model, it's a 500 gigabyte model, and they have a little bit slower write speeds when you compare it, for example, to the 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte models. 2500 megabytes per second, which is the write speed on these SSDs, is still within the bandwidth that you can achieve with PCI-Express Gen 3 times 4, which is the number of lanes that you have on an M.2 slot.
So indeed, so Caesar, you're saying indeed that the 4650G doesn't support Gen 4. That is correct. It does not.
Mr. Mastodux is saying, will gamers notice it? Nope, never. That's definitely true.
Yes.
Like maybe slightly in loading a very large game, but for your FPS, it will not matter at all.
Honestly, this is just if you are going to, for example, if you're a content creator and you are transferring huge files, like big video files, I mean, that will go, well, actually transferring, you know, as in writing, maybe not, but reading it into a program, for example, loading it in, yes, that will go a lot faster with PCIe Gen 4.
But also transferring. If you, for example, use multiple SSDs, for example, you're working on one SSD, and if you work with large video projects, you sometimes need to make space on that SSD, you want to write it to a different SSD, then you will notice differences. But of course, then it's also important that your second SSD is also a Gen 4 SSD, otherwise you will still bottleneck it by the slowest SSD. So it really depends on what you do and how useful a Gen 4 SSD is. But yes, they are extremely fast, and that's at this point where the main difference is between PCI-Express Gen 3 and Gen 4. At the moment, graphics cards are not really bottlenecked by Gen 3. At least the ones that work at 16 lanes, it's barely any difference. So yeah, you can see, even though this is a Zen 2 architecture APU,
yes,
it's still PCI-Express Gen 3, and that's something important to keep in mind. So also, if you manage to get your hands on one of these APUs, don't waste your money on a very expensive Gen 4 SSD, because they will be more expensive and you will still get Gen 3 SSD speeds. I
see a question that I think was kind of answered during or by Martijn, or at least in the interview with Martijn. Victor John Parr is asking, does my B450 Tomahawk Max support 4000 series?
The 4000 series APUs that we have right here, no. Later on, we'll talk about this more extensively, about what you can use on which exact model. But no, you cannot.
Hamblock, when you say games performance, what exactly do you mean? Because, you know, FPS doesn't really, this kind of thing doesn't really influence FPS too much. But I know that Mike is planning to show some game performance on the Ryzen 5 Pro. Yeah. Let's start off with a little bit of 3D, Mark, first. Yes. To show the 3D performance. Oh, here we got some questions later on as well. I'm planning to buy Ryzen 5 3600. Which motherboard should I pair with it? MSI B450 Gaming Pro Carbon Max or B550 Gaming Edge? That's a very good question, and it really depends on what you want. If you want to use, for example, a Gen 4 SSD, then you definitely need to go for the B550 model. If you're only using a Gen 3 SSD, in terms of storage speed, you will not have a difference between those two. But B550 motherboards are newer, also come with newer features. Later on, we'll talk a little bit more about this. But things about like a stronger VRM, front USB Type-C, stuff like that. Later on, we will go into more detail about the differences between these two. Will B550 support DDR5?
No.
I don't know if we can even say anything about it. We don't know, honestly.
No, it will never support DDR4.
It will not? Okay.
No.
There we go.
It's the B550 supports DDR4 memory.
There you go.
Yeah, let's maybe show this one full screen.
All B550s come with Wi-Fi?
Later on we will also show the other one with the RX 5500.
Glitching Pixel is asking, all B550s come with Wi-Fi? I don't think so, right?
No, it depends on the model.
Yep.
But there are models available also with Wi-Fi 6
Yes.
connectivity.
And that's, if you're gonna go for Wi-Fi, go for Wi-Fi 6.
Can you go to full screen on the... oh, I shouldn't click my scroller.
This
Let's
one,
go back.
yes.
Yeah. So then we can see all the details in the bottom as well.
All right, sure.
I will also run the benchmark on the other system. Of course, that will be stronger. It uses a dedicated graphics card in this situation.
This is
an
a
RX
graphics card
5500
test benchmark. So indeed, it's to be expected. If you look at, I'll just go to the main view so you can actually see. Mike, you can point it out.
Here, separate graphics card.
It's running. What is it? It's an RX
5500.
5500. Okay.
Yeah, 5500 XT.
Okay. So yeah, it's to be expected that the system on my side, basically this one.
Yeah.
With Lucky above it, that one is going to be faster in the 3D benchmark, obviously.
With quite a big margin, because even though it's an APU, so it has integrated graphics, and for integrated graphics, this is actually quite fast, and
pretty
you can.
Yeah, you're going to see that later on, because you can actually play pretty decently some games on there as well.
Like especially esports titles, if you think about Counter-Strike, Rocket League, Valorant, Overwatch, League of Legends. Yeah. What more do we have? Yeah. Games like those.
Exactly.
They're not very demanding.
No, they can run just fine on it, indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like meant for that. It's not built for that specifically, obviously, but you can still do that.
And it works pretty well, especially, for example, I will be playing a little bit of Rocket League on 1080p resolution later. Yeah. And games like those run pretty well. If you want to play on a higher resolution, if you want to play AAA titles, stuff like that, then of course a dedicated graphics card definitely makes sense.
Glitching Pixel is still asking some questions. Between the B550 and X570, which is the best for just gaming? I think both. I mean, it really depends. X570 I think is a bit higher end. B550 is a little bit newer. But Mike can probably say, I mean, both are fine.
Purely for gaming, if you use a single graphics card, not much difference from that perspective. If you want to have more expandability, if you want to have more and faster USB ports, stuff like that, then X570 comes in.
It has a bit more features, I guess, right?
Yeah, the chipset also has a little bit more features. Later on we'll go into more detail about that. But B550 is a little bit limited on the pci-express Gen 4 support when compared to X570. So you will have it on your primary graphics card, you will have it on your primary SSD, but on X570 you can order multiple graphics cards and multiple SSDs. So it depends on what you want, but in general, B550 should give you equal performance if you use a single Gen 4 SSD and a single graphics card.
The big Yesh asking why the lag. I guess you're referring to the frame lag, the low FPS. That's because we're running a very demanding graphics benchmark on an APU, on an integrated graphics on the
so there is no separate graphics card in here. Maybe we can show the close-up. There is nothing here.
Yeah, that's exactly. So it's just the motherboard with the CPU on it.
It's an empty PCI-Express slot. It's completely the CPU calculating all of this.
Yes.
So also the graphics part.
Yeah. So that's why, again, this is not like the most powerful graphics card or something. So that's why it's a really demanding benchmark. This meant for the dedicated graphics card pretty much. But obviously you can also run it on an APU. But it just goes to show that even this APU is able to handle this. Of course, it's not going to have the highest FPS. It's not meant to have that, but it can still cope, which is already quite impressive.
I see a question from Satya, which is better for overclocking, B550 Tomahawk or B550 Gaming Pro Carbon AC? Gaming Pro Carbon AC will be slightly better, but if you want to do overclocking, then I would definitely suggest to look at B550, because generally they have a way stronger VRM design. So for example, if you compare the Gaming Pro Carbon AC on B450 to the MPG B550 Gaming Carbon Wi-Fi, then you will see quite a big difference in the power of the VRM design. And this mainly has to do with the VRM design of the 400 series. Was of course designed for the Zen Plus architecture. They were up to 8 cores, but now with the Zen 2 architecture we already go up to 16 cores. So the processors are a little bit more demanding. Of course, because of the new process, it's not like it will consume double the power that the 8 core from the previous generation will do, but they will consume more power, of course, than a part with half the cores only. So yeah, if you're looking for overclocking, especially if you're going for a higher end CPU, then definitely look at B550 or even X570 if you really want to overclock, for example, a Ryzen 9 processor.
Chandu is live is asking, Ryzen 7 2700X overclocked plus an RTX 2060 overclocked, can they run long on an MSI B450M mortar? As in, what is the durability that you can expect on those?
Can you repeat the question?
If you're using a MSI B450M mortar motherboard and you're
B450?
running B450, yes.
Yeah.
And you're running an R7 Ryzen 7 2700X overclocked,
yeah,
and a RTX 2060 overclocked. What can you expect in terms of durability? I think you should be okay.
It really much depends on how far are you pushing your CPU.
Yeah.
If you want to push it to the max, that will be a little bit more tricky on a mid-range B450 motherboard. The power design it's quite okay for mild overclocks, but if you want to push it to the max basically, then you probably want to go for a stronger VRM design like you can find on B550 motherboards.
Yeah. Which motherboards are we comparing now? It's a good question, Yazid.
We have two exactly the same motherboards right here, and both of them are the MPG B550 Gaming Edge Wi-Fi. They're exactly the same. Okay. So also they run the same DDR4 3200 megahertz memory. The only difference being here we have an APU and there we have a CPU with a dedicated graphics card.
So the difference here in the setups is basically we're trying to show the difference of the CPUs, and one with the APU with the integrated graphics card and the other one without. So the motherboards and the rest of the setup we've tried to keep as similar as possible to make it a fair comparison between the two.
So it's that one has already finished running.
Are you running them both at the same time?
Yep.
There we go. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
So here you see them side by side.
Yep.
Let me move this one a little bit as well. So you can see the one with the dedicated graphics card is quite a bit faster. But of course, an RX 5500 can, for example, also play AAA titles. You will not be able to play it on 4K resolution, of course,
no.
on this kind of price range graphics cards. But still, a dedicated graphics card, don't expect the same performance from an APU.
No.
Of course, it is more affordable. There is only quite a small difference, I would say, between the regular CPU version and the version with APU. But of course, it cannot compete with the dedicated graphics cards that's over $200 US. So here you can see that difference, of course. But if we, for example, play a game, so we installed Rocket League on this.
Yeah, you can. Maybe while you do that, you can answer a question. I like this name. And Impeccable is asking, I'm using a PCI Wi-Fi card in a Pro VDM Max. Will it affect my graphics card performance, which is a GTX 1660 Super Ventus? So
a PCI Wi-Fi card?
A Wi-Fi card, a PCI, so an add-in card, I guess, on a Pro VDM Max board. And he's wondering if that will affect his performance of his graphics card.
No, it will not.
There you go. Short answer. No.
It's only if you if you really need many lanes. For example, if you're going to do multiple graphics cards, then there will not be enough lanes to address both of them. So then it will divide it in between the graphics card. You will still get higher performance than with a single one. But then, for example, depends on the chipset, but then you will, for example, have 8 lanes. So 8 lanes for each graphics card. But no, a Wi-Fi card will not influence this.
Jesse S is asking, any plans down the road to release a micro ATX X570 board?
A micro ATX X570 board?
Yeah.
I cannot...
I know you are, you know...
if we are, I cannot talk about it yet.
No. But I mean, I know that you're the guy to talk about when it comes to, you know, small builds. You really like them.
Yeah, I'm more of a mini ITX person.
Well,
I like micro ATX as well. I've been using it very long before I used mini ITX.
Yeah.
Should I chew my car? Nah, let's just play a little bit. So yeah, I have been building quite a lot with micro ATX. But quite many people that have been using micro ATX, especially the more enthusiast people, they tend to move to mini ITX. Nowadays, dual graphics card is not as popular as it used to be. So most people just use a single GPU. So you basically have enough with only a single PCI-express x16 slot. So yeah, many of the enthusiasts, they tend to move to mini ITX. But that doesn't mean that micro ATX is completely gone, but they tend to be a little less higher end usually.
Right.
So the chance that you will see that on higher end chipsets is always smaller than on, for example, B550, where you of course have some nice choices in micro ATX. So there is some Rocket League around 100 FPS.
Yeah, and so indeed,
really well playable.
There was a question by Wade Positive asking, so are we playing this on the APU? Yes.
Yes, we're playing this on the APU.
Yes. So this is the Ryzen 5 4650?
4650G.
There we go. Yeah.
The Pro model this is.
Exactly. So, you know, for a model that's not really, I don't want to say not designed for this, but really not aimed at gaming or stuff like that. But look at this. You get easily over 100 FPS.
Yeah,
it
runs perfectly well. So for esports titles like Rocket League in this situation, but also Counter-Strike and Dota, League of Legends, they will all run. Nice shot, teammate. Ooh. They will all run very well on an APU like this.
Yeah.
If you want to play AAA titles, then this will be a different story. Then definitely go for a dedicated graphics card.
Which GPU is present on the APU you are testing now? Well, it's an APU, so it's
a Vega with 8 compute units, but it's a bit hard to compare it in only the compute units because they're clocked way higher than the Vega 8 you had in the previous generation APUs.
So the performance is way better per unit, but because it has a few less units.
Oh wait, I'm not sure if it's 8 on this one. Might be 6. I think the Ryzen 7 has 8.
Oh, okay.
Compared to, for example, 11 on the. That was almost a goal. Comparing to, for example, 11 on the 3400G, but still the Ryzen 7 with 8 compute units will have better graphics performance than the Ryzen 5 from the previous generation with 11.
Will the new APU support 4K video editing and rendering with ease? Oh. Yeah, I don't know. And I don't even know if the APU is really down for this, but if you're going to do 4K video editing and rendering...
Yes, you can do it, but of course the more cores you will have, the shorter it will take. So if you want to do 4K resolution, then I would definitely recommend to look for like a 16-core processor, for example.
Threadripper.
Yeah, or even a Threadripper.
Yeah.
But even on AM4 platform, you will be able to do it quite well. But then you, for example, want to go for a Ryzen 9. 12-core 3900X or the 16-core 3950X. We're actually winning on an APU.
Yeah.
We're beating all those dedicated graphics cards.
Why do you sound surprised? I got a question here from Manavelus. How long will the B450 motherboards continue to be available? They're out of stock. I don't know where he is, but in his location or his country for quite a while already, and he hopes they won't reach EUL status too soon.
I'm not sure about every single model, and it also depends per region about how much stock there will be for certain models.
Yeah.
But it depends. I cannot give a clear answer for any model in any specific region.
No.
Put it in. Nice 560. Yeah. So yeah, I cannot guarantee that all the B450 models that we have right now will still be available in half a year, for example. Whereas for B550, of course, you will see them longer on because it's a newer chipset.
How can you play and talk at the same time?
Yeah, I play quite a lot of Rocket League, and this is like an account that's not used as much. So they automatically match you up with people at a certain level. I should have had that one.
It's a company account, this one, which is being used, for example, at events or something like that. So it's just, you know,
but I still
the level
missed it
of
here.
play is not very consistent.
Best motherboard for Ryzen 5 4600G APU. Well, definitely not a 400 series because it will not support that processor. I would say like a B550M Mortar or a B550 Tomahawk will be perfectly fine. Or if you're into ITX, the B550i Gaming Edge Wi-Fi is a very nice option as well. And that one is especially interesting because it has HDMI 2.1 support. And this means you can get very high resolution still at a very nice refresh rate. So if you have an Ultra HD television, if you still want to use it at its maximum refresh rate, you do need a higher version of HDMI than, for example, 1.4. So this one even has 2.1. So that's the newest standard that's out right now. Yeah. Thank you, teammate, for the bump.
I also saw Commie asking, what are the video settings on Rocket League right now? Maybe you can show that after the...
These are what I always call competitive settings, so they're not the highest settings. No. We are playing at full HD, so the regular resolution of this monitor. But they're performance settings, they call it in Rocket League, but they're more the lower settings.
Yeah. It still looks really nice, though.
You can play it on higher settings.
Yes.
I play on a GTX 1070 at home, so I, of course, can run it on high settings, but I still use low settings because I prefer
What about PUBG? I don't think PUBG is a game that you want to play on this, to be honest.
I think maybe if you really lower the resolution and the details, then you might be able to play it somehow, but it will not be a comfortable experience, I would say.
No. That game is probably just a bit too demanding and not well optimized enough.
Yeah, it's not really known for its optimization.
No, indeed.
And games like Rocket League, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, they're all very well optimized. Valorant also, the new one. Even though it's a very new game, it's not
EP is asking, besides gaming, I'm also an IT guy. Any advice for CPU, motherboard, running virtual machines, virtual servers? That's a very broad question there. Yeah, for that I believe you need a lot of CPU power. So in that situation, I would say look at a Threadripper. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend the AM4 platform. Still, you would be able to get decent performance. For example, if you get a Ryzen 9. It also depends how many virtual machines and servers you're trying to run.
Yeah.
I mean, a few. You can probably do that with an AM4 setup, indeed, and one of the Ryzen 7s or Ryzen 9s. And I guess you'll need plenty of memory as well. But yeah, if you're talking about bigger scale and more virtual machines, virtual servers, then you need to look at the Threadripper. Or maybe even higher.
Because apart from just the number of cores, of course you will get more on the Threadripper than on an AM4 CPU, but it's also the memory channels you have available. Because on TRX 40 with the Threadripper CPU, you will have 4 memory channels, whereas on AM4 you will only have 2 memory channels on also even the 16-core Ryzen 9. So I think virtual machines benefit quite well from CPU and memory bandwidth.
Yeah.
So then Threadripper, I would say. Michiel, why not try to compete in a World Championship? I'm not good enough at Rocket League for World Championship. I'm more of a
People are
casual
saying you
Rocket
need to
League
give
player
the other
with
team a chance at least. You're just showing off. By the way, I see people asking for different kinds of gaming benchmarks, or at least to show different kinds of games. We actually only had time to install one, which is Rocket League. So unfortunately, we cannot show you the gameplay performance on games like Valorant or CS:GO. But rest assured that those games should be fine.
Yeah.
FIFA, I'm actually not too familiar with how intensive that is. But
I think on games like Counter-Strike, Valorant, you can expect like similar performance like in Rocket League, I would say.
Yeah, pretty much. You all, at least, especially if you run competitive settings, you don't care too much about the graphics details. You should be quite comfortable to get over 100 FPS or something. Should be definitely possible.
We won! Yay! And MVP.
I was gonna say, you say we won, but I I think you mean you won.
Yeah, this was.
But to be honest, I saw the Gamer Pro guy
Gamer
getting
Pro
in quite
did
a bit
good
of
job.
goals as well. So
yeah, that was a good job by Gamer Pro. Oh, they want to team up. I'm sorry, Gamer Pro, but we're going to leave it
You
for
can't
here.
blame him.
We have seen the APU performance.
Yeah, you've seen the power of the APU.
Yeah. So as you can see, if you have an APU, you will always win in Rocket League. That's the conclusion, right?
Just how it works.
Yeah.
but of course, you also need the RGB.
Yeah, definitely. This
cooler.
motherboard has RGB, so
Yes.
even the cooler has RGB in this situation.
Yeah. Well, I saw some people asking about why we were using the standard, the stock, basically AMD cooler, the Wraith, I think is the
very simple reason. I wanted to have two identical setups because these are not the coolers that come with these CPUs.
Yeah.
But I wanted to have two identical setups, and I had two of these coolers. So that was that's the reason. Handblocks asking GTA 5. I wouldn't recommend games like those.
No.
I think maybe like very low settings if you also decrease the resolution a bit, but it will not give you a very comfortable gaming experience.
No, not really. RGB wins games. Hell yes, it does.
But if you play Rocket League, then no worries at all. An APU is perfectly fine.
Is MSI or AMD working on any tech that could make VR gaming very efficient? Well, it's difficult. VR gaming, yes. I mean, in general, always. We're looking at how to make gaming experiences better, no matter VR or not. And VR is still, it's I think, an emerging segment still. It's when it launched, it was all big noise, and then a lot of people were talking about it. But it takes time to develop all the content. So now this year, I think we saw one of the first real AAA titles of VR with Alex, Half-Life. And I think it takes a bit of time for developers to make something really cool, and then we still have to look at how the hardware develops. But in general, I think for this kind of usage, we've got pretty good systems already that will be pretty smooth. So it really depends on what they come up with, and how if we can think of very specific things that we can do to make things smoother or not. But in general, we're always looking at ways to improve things like that.
Molly91 is saying FIFA is not that demanding. I played FIFA 19 with 2400G, fine. Not great, but fine.
Yeah.
I think if you decrease your settings, you should be able to at least play it. I'm not sure about what kind of FPS you will achieve. Vagabond is saying Rocket League going free to play late summer.
Yeah,
I heard about it.
So more people saying that.
Yeah, it's Psyonix last year was bought by Epic Games, so I believe the free-to-play will only be in the Epic store, I'm guessing.
Interesting.
But I think all people that already have it in Steam will still be able to keep it within Steam. I think it's something like that.
So.
I don't know all the details, but yes, definitely, it's going free-to-play through Epic for sure.
So Mike will get more people to own.
More victims.
I wouldn't recommend people, trying it, Rocket League, because you just, you run up to people like Mike and you can have a bad day.
I'm not extremely good at. I'm okay at Rocket League.
Yeah.
I'm for a casual, I would say I'm pretty good, but I'm better at like arena shooters, Unreal Tournament, Quake, stuff like that. Well, you know about that as well, Peter.
Oh yeah. I've had the pleasure.
Did you like it?
Oh, I can still feel it now. It's I mean, Mike has his way with the railgun. He does.
Yeah, arena shooters are great. But like Rocket League, I'm okay, but there are quite a lot of people that can beat me at Rocket League at least.
Yeah.
What about TDP on that setup? The TDP for the CPU is 65 watts, but this is a G version. Then there are also several GE version, and they have a 35 watt TDP for the CPU. Of course, you still have different components as well. I don't know the exact consumption of this exact configuration here. It also depends on what else you use with it, what motherboard you use, what memory you use, how many external devices, SSDs, hard drives, etc. you use, and how much RGB you have, of course.
Andre is asking, I'm building a new PC and I'm about to choose the MSI, or he's thinking about picking the MSI MPG B550i Gaming Edge Wi-Fi. Would that be a good choice for a 3900X mini ITX build?
Definitely. Make sure you have good CPU cooling. Of course, it's a 12-core CPU, but the motherboard itself has a very, very strong VRM design. It has a direct 8-phase 60 amp power design, so it can easily run 3900X. No problem at all. I actually have one right here, so if you want to see it up close.
There you go.
Let me show it a little bit closer. So the VRM design is hidden underneath here, but it's a really beefy VRM design.
For such a small board, indeed.
Yeah. So it's quite cramped, but still they managed to fit.
You don't have that much space.
I actually also have the older version, the B450i Gaming Plus AC. There we have it. And this actually for that time also had a really strong VRM design, but on the B550i is quite a lot stronger even though this was already like in terms of VRM design, this is the strongest B450 ITX board that you can find anywhere. But B550 is even quite a bit stronger. So especially, I see some people enthusiastic about mini ITX. If you're interested in mini ITX, I think, let me look at the date.
Maybe a couple of weeks time?
Approximately a month, I think.
Yeah.
I will do a dedicated live stream about ITX. So there we'll also talk about this very nice MPG B550i Gaming Edge Wi-Fi motherboard. Exactly. But also our Z490i model. So we'll talk about several ITX motherboards. And I think we'll also do a nice build with it maybe. So if you have any suggestions for the stream, for an ITX stream, what do you really want to know? What do you really want to see in an ITX stream? You can drop them down here and we'll try to prepare it.
Or in the comments if you're watching this video after it goes
live. Definitely.
Invective is asking, why does that board have a fan? It's such a small board and it still has a fan.
Very good question. B550, of course, supports PCI-Express Gen 4. And PCI-Express Gen 4 SSDs, they tend to get quite hot compared to most Gen 3 SSDs. For mini ITX, you will have many components crammed into a very small size. And this motherboard should also be suitable for like the really enthusiast kind of cases. So for example, the Ghost S1, the Den A4, the N-Case M1, cases like those, they have very limited space. Sometimes they're like only 7 liters or something in terms of volume, including the graphics card section. So everything's really close to each other, and also as you can see, the CPU on an ITX board is relatively close to the SSD. This means that all components will heat up your system and will also heat up the SSD. And with the Gen 4 SSD, because they already get a little bit hotter, they tend to throttle in that situation. So to avoid SSD throttling, especially in very small ITX cases, there is a semi-passive fan, so it supports zero frost technology. So if it's not needed, it will not spin at all. You can also control it in the BIOS. But if you use an extremely small case with a Gen 4 SSD, to make sure your SSD doesn't throttle, there is a semi-passive fan here.
I see Yaya Dureja may not have been following the whole stream because he's asking, does the Ryzen 4600G have better raw CPU performance than the 3600? It's the same.
Yeah, so now we have the Pro model here, the 4650G, but it will be similar, of course, to the 4600G. Yeah. The difference being this one has a lot of business security options and stuff like that.
Yes. So if you want to know more about that, that's actually what we covered earlier in the stream, so you can
you can scroll back a little bit,
later.
But it's extremely close to a Ryzen 5 3600, extremely similar. Both 6-core, 12 threads, both Zen 2 architecture, relatively similar in CPU frequency.
Rafai, is the MSI Tomahawk a good choice? I'll stop you there. Yes, but to pair with a Ryzen 5 3600.
I see.
I think yes, but it also depends.
Y2K is commenting. There are 3 Tomahawks available. Which one do you mean? Do you mean
exactly
the B450 Tomahawk Max, or do you mean the MAG B550 Tomahawk?
This is Mike flexing, by the way.
Or
He's just showing
do
off.
you mean the MAG X570 Tomahawk Wi-Fi? So yeah, several options out there. Which one do you mean?
Exactly. One Tomahawk is not equal to another.
Joe Brown is saying it's actually an ITX. Mike just has huge hands. Can you play 4K games on a B550-A Pro? Depends on your graphics card.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you have a high-end graphics card and proper CPU, definitely you can. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Why is there no
we've run
Type-C
several.
on B550. It's 2020.
Yeah.
But is that true? Is there no Type-C on
there is.
B550?
There is.
I was going to say.
There is.
Yeah.
Why is there no Type-C on B550?
Yeah,
there is Type-C on B550. That's
is there Type-C on all the B550s?
Yes. On MSI, yes.
There you go.
Like if you, for example, I just grabbed the small ones because they're easier to show next to each other.
Yeah. Wait, let's go. Here we go.
Here you can see this is the B550. There is the front Type-C connector. And also on the rear panel, you have a Type-C connector.
Ooh.
Whereas this is the B450i. It didn't have a Type-C connector yet on the rear, and also no Type-C header.
Yeah.
So that's one of the changes in between many B450 and B550 boards.
Exactly.
So the Renoir APUs, we've been running a couple of benchmarks. I've been playing some Rocket League on it. Went quite well. How much was it? Like 12-0 or something? 11-0? I don't know.
I saw 13 at some point.
Yeah,
But
so APUs, great for Rocket League.
Yeah.
But also our in-house overclocker, Top PC, has been fiddling around a little bit with those Renoir APUs.
Yes.
So he, for example, put it on a liquid nitrogen.
He's got a fun job, doesn't he?
Difficult word. Sorry?
He's got a fun job.
Yeah, he's got a fun job. He's playing around with cold hardware all the time. Frozen hardware, basically.
Exactly.
So he put in our the MPG B550 Gaming Carbon Wi-Fi. He put an R7 Pro, so Ryzen 7 Pro, which is 8-core 16-thread CPU, 4750G, and he clocked it to 5800 megahertz. So that's fast.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's you can overclock it quite well, apparently.
Yes.
And this is even a B550 motherboard. So also on B550 you can overclock very well. He also put it on the MEG X570 Godlike, specifically for memory overclocking. And they're pretty good at that as well. This was the Ryzen 3 4350G, and he achieved a DDR4 speed of 6118 megahertz. Yeah. So also in terms of memory frequencies, you can get insane performance out of these CPUs.
It just shows you how much there is in there. I mean, obviously these are not speeds that you're going to be running on a day-to-day basis. No. This is under extreme circumstances with extreme cooling, liquid nitrogen, that kind of stuff. But it does go to show just how much potential is still in there.
Yeah, and it also shows the difference, like if you had the Zen Plus architecture compared to the Zen 2 architecture. Zen 2 can achieve way higher memory frequencies than Zen Plus. And that's also something you could already see with the 3000 series CPUs, and now you can see it with the 4000 series APUs.
Any B550 with Wi-Fi? Yes, just check our
Multiple,
website.
Yes.
There are a couple of boards there.
This is one of them. Here you can
go.
see the antenna connection points.
Here we go.
There.
Yes.
Wi-Fi 6 is included on this one, for example. Not all of them. Like the more entry-level ones sometimes have Wi-Fi 5. But the gaming models that have Wi-Fi have Wi-Fi 6, for example. Another thing that our in-house overclocker tested is different memory frequencies and how they influence your GPU performance, basically, on the APU. And he made a nice overview for this. And there you can see that at lower memory frequencies, of course, the APU will use your DDR4 memory also for the graphics side of things, where a dedicated graphics card has dedicated VRAM. But because of this, it is extremely important how fast your memory is. And this is one of the reasons why Renoir APUs perform quite a lot better with the same number of compute units than Picasso, which were the 3000 series APUs. So they both have a higher frequency for the GPU, but also the higher frequency for the memory that will also be used as VRAM in an APU. It makes quite a big difference. So here you see that it's very important to get fast memory if you manage to get your hands on one of these APUs. So we would definitely recommend to go at least 3200 megahertz. If you go below that, then you will see a significant impact on your GPU performance. 3600 is also quite nice in terms of price performance. Beyond that, you will see a slight increase, but it will be a minor increase and it will be quite a bit more expensive, those memory kits. So usually for a Renoir APU, like the best price performance will be like 3200, 3600 megahertz DDR4 memory approximately.
Okay, I got a really good question from Jack H, who's saying, what should one look for in a motherboard? I just look at the pretty lights and cool logos. I mean, if that's what's most important to you, then yeah, go ahead.
It depends very much on what you want to do with it.
Exactly.
If you're a case modder, then you're mostly interested probably in the looks and the lights indeed.
Yes.
Otherwise, if you're a content creator, you will be looking for different things in a motherboard than a gamer. So it really depends on what you want to do, where you have to look at. If you want to do overclocking, you look at a strong VRM design. If you do content creation, you're probably looking for a lot of fast storage.
Yes.
Also that the motherboard is capable of running a high core count CPU, stuff like that.
Productivity, basically.
Yeah, productivity. If you're into gaming, then most
RGB.
gamers...
No, oh, sorry.
Yeah, RGB of course gives you a way higher FPS. But if you're into gaming, you probably want more gaming centered features.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really depends on what you want.
Yeah. Optimized performance, high single core performance as well, obviously, which most are pretty good. But yeah, you'll have just slightly different things you're going to be looking at. Depending on what you want to do with it. And of course, very few people only do one thing with their rig. So you're bound to have several things you want to be doing with it. So that's why there's like most of our systems are some have features that are geared more towards one side or the other, but they can still be used in different ways. So it's not that you can like easily make an actual wrong choice. The thing that's I think for most people a big question mark, especially if you're not been keeping tabs and keeping up with the markets and stuff, is more like, hey, which CPU can I actually use on which motherboard? Because there is some things that can, some things are not compatible, and that's something you want to pay attention to. But other than that, generally speaking, there are good choices and better choices. And
I think that, like what you mentioned, if you want to do multiple things on your system, for example, if you do content creation as well as gaming, I think, for example, AM4 platform is a really good platform for that. Because you can, even though it's a mainstream platform, so mostly centered at gaming, I would say, more than content creation, because for dedicated content creation, usually Threadripper is the better choice. But it's still, even though it's a mainstream platform, you can still get up to 16 cores. So if you do a lot of gaming, if you do a bit of content creation on the side, then especially those Ryzen 9 CPUs like the 3900, 3900X, the 3900 XT, but also the 16-core 3950X are very well suitable for that.
Well, don't forget, I mean, how many? It's not been that many years ago when that kind of amount of cores and that kind of performance was not in the consumer segment at all. Yeah. You had to pay ridiculous amounts of money for really high-end desktop CPUs, and now this is something that is becoming even more common. So that is just mind-boggling if you think about it. Just the amount of things that you can do with what is considered consumer grade CPUs and hardware. Yeah, and that's great because it opens a lot of doors and really enables you to do a lot of things that you couldn't do just, I don't know, 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, I think in up to 2017 when AMD launched the first generation RYZEN. Before that, like the higher end mainstream platform CPUs had up to 8 cores, or 4 cores and 8 threads.
Yeah.
That was basically it. And with RYZEN,
and that was high end.
That was high end back then. And with RYZEN, of course, from the first generation on, you had up to 8 cores, 16 threads.
Yeah.
And now with the third generation, you have up to 16 cores and 32 threads.
It's ridiculous, then, really.
I see a good question in chat from Renoir. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly. Is B550 6-layer or 4-layer? That very much depends on the exact motherboard you have.
Yeah.
For example, the B550i that I have right here, the ITX model, this one is even an 8-layer motherboard, and that has to do with you have very limited size, so you need more layers to be able to basically put everything on there.
Run all the lanes.
Yeah. So this is even an 8-layer motherboard, so it depends on which exact model you're talking about. But I would say most regular size motherboards are either 4 or 8 layers.
Yeah.
The bigger ones. So usually ITX is higher. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the differences between the chipsets. If we go back to
yes.
our slides.
Of course.
Let's first, of course, if you're going to build a new system, you usually first pick what CPU do I want, and then you pick a motherboard with it. So in that sense, it's very important to know which motherboard do you need for your CPU. Especially with AM4, there are now quite many different chipsets from different generations available, and there are several CPU generations available. But not every single chipset generation is compatible with every CPU generation. So in this overview, you can see, like, for example, the new the Renoir APUs, they're only compatible with the 500 series chipsets. So if you want to go for Renoir, then for sure you will need at this point either B550 or X570 motherboard. If you, for example, want to run a 3000 series CPU like the Ryzen 5 3600 we have right here, or any other 3000 series, all the way up to the 3950X, those you can run on a 400 series motherboard as well. But like I explained before, the power delivery circuit was not specifically made for the third generation Ryzen, because 400 series were launched with the 2000 series CPUs from AMD. So they were designed for up to 8 cores, 16 threads basically. Of course, a higher end B450 motherboard can still run a Ryzen 9 processor even. But a more entry level B450 board will struggle with a very high core count Ryzen 9 third gen Ryzen CPU. So it's, even though it can sometimes support it, it's not always the ideal combination. Also important to mention, if you have a Picasso APU, so those are the 3000 series APUs, they're based on the Zen Plus architecture, and they are not supported by, for example, B550. So if you have an APU right now, like for example a Ryzen 5 3400G, and if you want to upgrade your motherboard, you cannot use a B550 motherboard for that. So that's something to keep in mind. It is supported, however, by X570. So really be careful about your combination of CPU and motherboard. So if you are going to buy a certain CPU, definitely double check what chipsets it's supported by. Yeah,
I think that's a good tip. I saw a lot of people asking, very specific questions about their build. Most of them look pretty good to me.
What question do you mean exactly?
No, well, I saw some. Well, the chat is actually going so fast; it's hard to keep up with it. But MJ Draza was saying, as a streamer, I just ordered an X570 MSI Ace, AMD 3900 XT, and a 2080 Super with 32 gigs of RAM. Is this good enough for streaming and gaming at the same time?
Easily.
Yes, easily. You've got plenty of cores on your CPU, so you should be able to handle your streaming and coding on your CPU.
You can choose, because you also have NVENC.
Yeah, and you have NVENC on the 2080 Super there, so which should also be quite good. Although it really depends on what kind of game you're running. If you're doing competitive games, you probably have some headroom left on your GPU, so you could use that for encoding. If you're running a very GPU intensive game, then it's probably better to do it over.
It actually doesn't influence it that much because the performance impact of NVENC is really small.
All right.
So
but still, you can choose.
Yeah, because your CPU is so powerful that you can encode on your CPU, and you have NVENC on your graphics card, which is also, especially on Turing, good in encoding.
But you should be good. That's the short of it.
Yeah, both on the CPU and GPU side, you're perfectly fine for streaming. And I see some more questions.
I think it's time for another giveaway, to be honest.
That's a good idea.
Let's do that.
So if you haven't participated yet, go to msi.com/2/insider. Now we'll give away another $20 Steam wallet code, but at the very end, we will give away the MSI MAG B550 Tomahawk motherboard, together with the MAG Core Liquid 360R liquid cooling, all-in-one liquid cooling, with of course a 360mm radiator.
Yep.
So yeah, you can stick a nice CPU in there and you're ready to go.
Excellent combination. You can put a pretty damn powerful CPU on there and overclock it as well.
Yeah.
All right. Our winner's name is.
Guys, why do you have such difficult names today?
I did the last one.
Yeah. Okay. Syair. Syair. SYAIER.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you also won a $20 Steam wallet code. And the next winner has to be a little bit easier to pronounce.
Well, we hope.
So guys, just so you know, if you have a difficult name, you will not win.
No, that's not a requirement.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
So yeah, you also win $20 Steam wallet code. We will email it to you in the coming days, so keep an eye out on your mailbox.
Yes.
And if you haven't participated yet, make sure to do so. If you have already participated, you will automatically be enrolled for the following drawings as well, including the one where you can win the MAG B550 Tomahawk motherboard, as well as the MAG Core Liquid 360R water cooling.
Hackdog Gaming is saying, I'm a mobile dev running mobile emulators. Will Ryzen 7 3700X be sufficient for, let me see, plus a B450 Tomahawk Max be good enough to run that? Honestly, I don't know.
I'm not very experienced with those mobile emulators.
But I would probably think yes. You know, again, usually mobile requirements tend to be a bit lighter than the desktop ones.
Yeah, but these are emulators. I have been using them a little bit in the past.
I don't know how well they scale in performance, or if they require a lot more.
The main thing I remember from those mobile emulators is that it reminds me of how bad I am at JavaScript. So I'm mostly, when I'm looking back at it, mostly thinking back of how bad I was at it. I don't specifically know anymore how demanding they were on certain hardware. Right. But the combination of the B450 Tomahawk Max with a 3700X CPU is a very nice combination. Yeah. Of course, it is B450, so you will not be able to use pci-express Gen 4. That's something to keep in mind. You will also not, for example, have the front USB Type-C, stuff like that. But the motherboard can easily run the CPU. You can slightly overclock it if you want to push it to the maximum. Then, of course, B550 or X570 would usually be a little bit better choice.
Victor John Parr has a B450 Tomahawk Max motherboard. What is the best fit CPU in your motherboard? Well, AM4, obviously.
Yeah, but, AM4. Like the combination we just mentioned, a B450 Tomahawk with a 3700X is a very nice fit. You can go higher, but then you're pushing boundaries, especially if you're going to overclock. Yeah. But a 3700X on a B450 Tomahawk Max is a fast and comfortable situation, I would say. Yeah, let's continue with our slides.
Yes, here we go.
Here you see an overview of the differences in between chipsets. So here we have AMD, of course, already announced A520, but this is not released yet, so more information about that later. We will definitely do something with it in a live stream as well, but today we're focusing on B450 versus B550 versus X570. The first and major difference between the 400 and the 500 series is, of course, PCI-Express Gen 4. Which is available on both B550 and X570. But there is a difference in between those two, because on B550 you will only have PCI-Express Gen 4 on the first. Let me just grab a motherboard so I can show you as well. on the MAG B550 Tomahawk that you can win as well, by the way. You only have PCI-Express Gen 4 on the primary PCI-Express graphics slot x16 and the primary M.2 slot. So on both of these you will have PCI-Express Gen 4. Then the connection from the CPU to the chipset will be PCI-Express Gen 3. And also the general purpose lanes that come from the chipset towards all other kind of areas on the motherboard are PCI-Express Gen 3. So also, for example, the second M.2 slot will be PCI-Express Gen 3. If we take a look at the X570 Tomahawk in this situation, there you will, like with B550, have PCI-Express Gen 4 on the primary GPU slot, so x16 slot, also on the primary M.2 slot. But in this situation, you also have Gen 4 from the CPU to the chipset and also your general purpose lanes. So also towards, for example, the second M.2 slot is also PCI-Express Gen 4. The second PCI-Express x16 slot is also PCI-Express Gen 4. So that's one of the main differences in between B550 and X570. Another, for many people, big difference is X570 needs a fan, B550 doesn't. But on X570 motherboards, all MSI X570 motherboards have zero throttle technology, so the fan will only start spinning if it actually needs to. And in many situations it will not even spin. It's only if you put like many different devices on your motherboard and you will really stress your chipset, then it will start spinning. Yeah. But still, it's a relatively big fan for, at least for a motherboard, it's quite a big fan. So it can run at relatively low speed to also reduce noise.
And I mean, you know, especially the zero throttle part is, you guys will know it from our graphics cards. This is one of the most important things because, you know, most of the time the chipset will not heat up sufficiently that the fans doesn't even need to spin. Yeah. So that's always good that, you know, if it's still cool and if you're idling or just doing some light loads or even during gaming when it's not being stressed that high, the fan is probably not even spinning most of the time. So
I see a question in chat, why do X570 motherboards have chipset fans? Yeah, because they get harder than B550, but the fan will not always spin. It also very much depends on the situation you're using it in. If you have a very well ventilated case with a lot of airflow, good cooling, then your fan is not very likely to spin very often. If you don't have much airflow, if it's hot in your case, if you use an extremely high-end GPU or even two, then chances are bigger that it will spin. So it really much depends on what you're going to do with it exactly. So we talked about the differences between B550, X570, but then we also have B450. And here I have the Tomahawk version, the B450 Tomahawk Max. In this situation, you also you don't have PCI-Express Gen 4. You have PCI-Express Gen 3, so even if you use a 3000 series CPU, a Matisse CPU, you will still only have Gen 3 to the graphics card, also the M.2 slot. In this situation, the link in between the CPU and the chipset is also PCI-Express Gen 3, but the general purpose lanes on B450 are only PCI-Express Gen 2. So that's also a difference with B550. It didn't only upgrade the PCI-Express generation on the PCI-Express slot and on the M.2 slot, but also on the general purpose lanes from the chipset. So in terms of PCI-Express support, it's quite a big step up from B450 to B550.
Yeah. Seeing some questions about does the B550 Gaming Plus have the same VRM as the B550 Gaming Edge Wi-Fi or the B550 Tomahawk? I'm not sure about that one.
The B550 Gaming Plus, the B550 Gaming Edge and Tomahawk, no, they're not all identical.
Yeah.
I don't know all from the top of my head, but I know they're not identical.
Crank Moon, does the B550i Gaming Edge have a chipset fan? Yes. Or sorry, why does it have a, because Well, it's not. I don't think it's a chipset fan, right?
It's more basically the chipset is also located underneath because it's a very small board.
Yeah.
But the main reason why the fan is there is the M.2 SSD.
Yeah.
Especially because now Gen 4 SSDs, they get quite hot. People, especially enthusiasts, they tend to use extremely small cases. Like if you, for example, if you're maybe familiar with our Infinite X, or Infinite S and Infinite X, they're also quite small cases. So sometimes there is a lot of high-end hardware. You can run, for example, a Ryzen 9 CPU on there. You can put a extremely high-end graphics card in it as well for a very high-end gaming system. But of course, it's all very close to each other. And if you have a very small case, so not a lot of opportunities for airflow, there is a risk that your Gen 4 SSD will throttle because it will heat up because of all the components. But very important here to mention is that the fan is semi-passive. So if it doesn't need to spin, it will not spin. So if you have sufficient airflow, if you don't run a very hot SSD, then it will not spin.
If you're simply not doing anything, straining on your system, it's not spinning.
It's just to make sure that your system, your SSD will not throttle.
Exactly. You get the full
in complex situation. Yeah, you get the full performance.
So Colin Ang is asking, am I right to say that X570 is better than B550? I wouldn't say better, but it has more features. So it really depends on what you want and what you expect from your platform.
It's higher end. It can do more. Yeah. In that sense, it is better, but it will not matter for everyone.
No.
If you're only going to use a single graphics card, a single M.2 SSD, even Gen 4, then B550.
You will not notice the difference.
You will not notice the difference, basically. No. If you want to use multiple Gen 4 SSDs, for example, you cannot do that on B550. Only the primary one will be Gen 4. Yeah. Secondary one will be Gen 3. Yeah. So it really much depends on your configuration if it is better.
Yes.
Max Bunny is saying it's still strange that PCI-Express Gen 4 SSDs can overheat. It seems better to just get PCI-Express Gen 3 and not worry about it. It's not that all PCI-Express Gen 3 SSDs are very cold. It's also just in general, Gen 4 SSDs, from my experience, get a little bit hotter, also because they usually have chips on both sides. And the controllers get a little bit warmer in general, but there are also, especially high-end Gen 3 SSDs can also get pretty hot. So even if you have a Gen 3 SSD and you push it to the max, and especially in a small form factor build, then you can also throttle those. So it's not specifically Gen 4, but it's in general, they're usually a little bit warmer.
I just saw CrossFit saying, I don't think I've ever seen the chipset fan spin on my X570 Tomahawk, so there you go.
Yeah, in many situations it won't. If you have a well-ventilated case, if there is not extremely much strain on your chipset from what you have on your motherboard, attached to your motherboard, then it will run passive. Yeah. So it is there just to be sure, but that doesn't mean that it will spin. So let's get back to the slides.
Let's do that.
So yeah, we talked about PCI-Express support, which is of course a big difference between B450, B550 and X570. B450 only Gen 3 on both the graphics card and the M.2 SSD. General purpose lanes will even be Gen 2. For B550, both are one generation further, 4.0 on the primary PCI-Express and the primary M.2, and Gen 3 towards the chipset and the general purpose lanes. And X570, of course, you have to use the right CPU, like with B550, but then you can have Gen 4 on everything, basically. All these chipsets supports overclocking, but that doesn't mean it's always a good idea to overclock with any combination. Because yes, you can put a 3950X 16-core processor on an entry-level B450 board, and it will work. But you don't want to push it to the max, and especially not overclock it to the max, because the VRM design is also not built for that. So if you want to use a very high-end CPU, and especially if you want to overclock it, make sure you get a motherboard with a beefy power design. And now in the B550 series and the X570 series, there are plenty of boards with the beefed up power design.
Related question to this, Caesar is asking, what is the difference of USB 3.1 and 3.2?
The name.
Because I see indeed
it's all about the
B450,
generation, basically.
B450 it says USB 3.1 Gen 1, and then on the B550 and X570 it says USB 3.2 Gen 2.
It's basically the same, but in between the launches of B450 and B550,
the name was changed.
The name was changed from USB 3.1 to USB 3.2. And then the generation basically says how fast it is. So USB 3.1 Gen 1 is what used to be USB 3.0 even, which is super speed USB 5 gigabit per second. So that tells the speed.
Really, I mean, the speed is basically what matters, I guess, or what helps you to.
So that is 5 gigabit per second. If you compare it to Gen 2, so previously that was called USB 3.1 Gen 2. Nowadays it's called USB 3.2 Gen 2. That one goes up to 10 gigabit per second.
There you go.
And then the official name is super speed USB 10 gigabit per second. And then there is USB 3.2 Gen 2 times 2 to make it even more complicated. And that is super speed USB 20 gigabit per second. So that one doubles the speed compared to the regular USB 3.2 Gen 2. So basically there are, in the USB 3.2 speed, there are 3 speeds basically. Gen 1 is 5 gigabit per second, Gen 2 is 10 gigabit per second, and Gen 2 times 2 is 20 gigabit per second.
Interesting question, or statement rather, by Class Savage, is saying, according to AMD, Zen 1 and Zen Plus CPUs are not supported on B550 motherboards, but I've seen someone run their old Ryzen 7 1700 on a B550 motherboard without updating the BIOS. Why is AMD not promoting older CPUs on B550 motherboards?
I haven't tried this combination myself.
No.
I know that officially it's not supported. I did not try to stick a first generation in a B550 motherboard. So
not supported is not the same as saying it will never work. In some cases it could work. It just means that it's not guaranteed to work. As in, it's not meant to be used together. I also don't think, the first generation or Ryzen 1700, for example, is a really great CPU. But I honestly think if you're going with a B550 board that, you're going to be selling yourself short if you're not going to be also using a newer CPU. So it's kind of like, why would you? Technically, you can try it and sometimes it can work, but it's not really an optimal combination.
And also worth to mention here is that you're not guaranteed support if it doesn't work.
Exactly.
Because it's not an officially supported combination.
Yeah.
So even though it might work, I really don't know because I haven't tried this combination myself.
I think this falls into the same category that you just mentioned. Like, just because you can technically maybe make something work doesn't make it a good combination or a good idea. As long the whole thing also, if it's supported, there's a reason for that, because it means it's usually it kind of makes sense. It's a combination that works well together, and then in between that margin there are combinations that work even better, and there are combinations that work but it's not quite optimal, and this one falls even I guess outside of that.
And they're probably also not tested properly and validated with those combinations. Because, for example, on B450 boards, in the past, it was also possible with certain BIOS versions to run PCI-Express Gen 4 on B450. But stability was not guaranteed. Those motherboards were not optimized for Gen 4, so they did not have, for example, the server-grade PCB that Gen 4 motherboards have. They did not have the Gen 4 switches, the redrivers, stuff like that. So even though you might be lucky and it might work, it can be unstable as well, and it's not guaranteed that it will work properly.
And it probably won't use the full potential anyway, so it's kind of a waste to do that.
Yeah, so sometimes you have like Frankenstein combinations that work, but they're not officially supported, so it can be a little bit tricky. So we already talked about PCI-Express Gen 4 support. This is only on B550 and X570. It's official. On B550, primary PCI-Express slot, primary M.2 slot. On X570, everything is Gen 4. So also the link in between the CPU and the chipset, and also the general purpose lanes. Whereas on B550, that's Gen 3. On B450, it's Gen 3 on the graphics card and the SSD. And the general purpose lanes are even Gen 2. This is, for example, this is an example of the speed you can achieve when you have an M.2 SSD on Gen 4. We also demonstrated one today that was a 500 gigabyte model. It had a little bit lower writing speeds than the model in this demonstration.
Yeah.
But especially the reading speeds will be approximately 5,000 megabytes per second at this moment, because of course in the future you will have even faster PCI-Express Gen 4 SSDs. Yeah. This is still like the first generation basically of PCI-Express Gen 4 SSDs. And it's actually quite impressive that they can already do 5,000 megabytes per second, because that's a pretty big step up from like the highest end Gen 3 SSDs that can do up to 3,500, and then they get bottlenecked by the interface. But of course, the Gen 4 interface still has room for improvement in that sense.
Yeah. Luckily, because that means that we can look forward to even faster
in the future, you will
speeds.
definitely see faster Gen 4 SSDs. I can promise you that.
Not that these aren't fast enough, mind you.
They are crazy fast already, but they will be even faster in the future.
So this is a case of why do you make them faster? They don't need to be, simply because they can, and it's.
And for some people, it's very useful.
We're going to thank them for this later, when you know there are crazy games or other applications that will actually use that speed. You know, you'll unlock new potential.
And like Mr. Masterdox also mentioned, this will not increase your FPS.
No.
This is more for extremely fast.
Not right now, at least.
Yeah,
you know?
not right now.
Not in the current kind of games and generation of you know things we're talking about. You probably won't notice the difference. There is a difference if you would care to measure it like in milliseconds. So you probably see that there is some difference, yes. But because the games aren't really geared to use this kind of speed yet, and the files aren't that huge.
Atom Breacher has another point, but loading times, yes, that's something where you might see difference.
Yes.
Of course, it depends on how the game is designed and if there are no other bottlenecks that influence the loading times. But it's indeed more likely that it will influence loading times rather than FPS in your game.
But even loading times, I mean, I've seen some very interesting videos that compare loading times. Honestly, the biggest jump and difference you notice in loading times is when you go from an HDD, so a spinning disk drive, to an SSD, even a SATA drive. As long as it's an SSD, and that's simply the latency basically. Yeah. That's the biggest difference. And then of course within the SSD space, yes, an M.2, especially with Gen 4, is going to be faster. But I think you're going to be, I don't know what the game is with the longest loading times, but you're going to be, saving milliseconds at some point, which is, you're unlikely to notice it. Really.
Yeah, if you have like giant games, it might shave off a second maybe, but it will be minor.
Exactly.
But for example, if you transfer files from one SATA SSD to another, or if you transfer files from one NVMe SSD to another, that's a huge difference.
That's where you're gonna, or saving, like that's why, for example, content creation, if you're working with 4K video files and trying to save them or load them or stuff, that's where you're gonna notice the difference. That's gonna be a big difference right there.
So some people already asked about, can I use this motherboard and can I overclock this CPU with it? And that's where the VRM design is like the main deciding factor. And especially because these new CPUs, they go up to so many cores. The VRM design between B450 boards and B550 boards, it's quite a difference in general. Of course, this depends per specific board, but if you compare like generation to generation, so if you compare, for example, the Tomahawk Max I have right here, the B450 one, with the MAG B550 Tomahawk, you will see that the B550 Tomahawk has a way stronger VRM design. It, for example, uses power stages instead of traditional MOSFET. It also, this one already has the extended heatsink.
Yeah, for better cooling.
Right there. So it already has an increased surface area, but on B550, this surface area is even bigger. So this is completely made out of metal. You can also, here you can see it a little bit better.
So even better.
You can see there's more surface area here. There are cutouts here as well to increase the surface area. So the VRM design is also quite a big step up from most B450 boards towards B550 boards. And if we go back to the slide, we see, for example, an MPG B550 Gaming Carbon Wi-Fi VRM design. Peter, do you have the slide for me?
Yes, sorry.
And here you see, for example, 12-phase VRM design with 60 amp power stages. That one has a doubler design. So this is an extremely strong VRM design, and we, for example, saw the new 4750G APU on there, and that one, Top PC, our in-house overclocker, clocked it to 5800 megahertz on this motherboard. Of course, that is using LN2, but yeah, it's extreme.
Not something you're likely to do at home. Unless your name is Martijn.
Goro is saying, Peter, Mike is always pushing you around. It's time to put him in his place. Smack him and tell him to get his own damn slides.
These are his slides, to be honest, but it's my job to indeed switch the scenes and make sure that
I can
you're
switch
seeing
the
right
slides.
stuff.
Look, like next one, no.
There you go.
Because also the thermal solution, we shortly touched on this, about what you can see on the top, that the extended heatsink is a little bit bigger, mostly on B550 models compared to B450. But also the thermal pads have changed, and we actually increased also the number of thermal pads you will see underneath there. In B450 you will only find thermal pads in between the MOSFETs and the heatsink. On B550 you will also find thermal pads in between the heatsink and the chokes to further increase the thermal dissipation from the VRM design to the heatsink, and essentially give you lower VRM temperatures.
You're reading the chat?
Yeah, I'm seeing some questions. Any recommendation which build should be fine for the new generation of graphics games? I don't know exactly how demanding like the future games will be.
I guess maybe you're referring to games like Cyberpunk and
the upcoming games, yeah.
There's a lot of questions that you need to ask then to be able to give you solid advice, because it really depends on what resolution are you playing, and then you're basically talking about graphics card. But you also need to consider the specs for these games will be released when they are close to launch, and then they'll tell you what's the minimum spec and the recommended spec. But it really depends on the resolution. And rest assured, when these games come out, we're gonna do like a full stream on that shows you per resolution what setup, what kind of hardware is best to run it. But if you want to be, here's the thing: the answer is pretty much always, if you want to be future-proof, just buy the most powerful hardware you can get for your budget. But there is no such thing as a guarantee of future-proof. It's only up until a certain point, and it also depends on what you expect it to do. But if you want to be sure and have the right hardware for a certain game, just make sure you look it up when it launches. Either before it launches or after, you'll have lots of data of people testing and giving you good information about what hardware will run it best. But it's hard to give you proper advice on that.
Jimmy is saying, what are your thoughts on the carbon thermal pads? You mean the B550 ones? I think it's a good development that there are now also thermal pads in between the chokes and the VRM heatsink. And that especially has to do with the hotspot on the motherboard, because of course usually the MOSFETs on the motherboard, they get warmer than the choke. So you would expect, of course, you put the thermal pads on the MOSFETs, but the hotspot on a motherboard is very often between the MOSFETs and the CPU, because the CPU also generates heat, and sometimes in between there can be like combined heat, so it gets really hot in that part of the motherboard, and that's usually where the chokes are located, because they're in between the MOSFETs and the CPU. So the chokes can get really hot because of the combined heat, because of those two. So the chokes themselves, they don't generate that much heat like MOSFETs do, but because of the part where they are located, it's still very much worth it to put thermal pads there to get better heat dissipation in general. Cullen is saying, can you guys start streaming like 1 or 2 hours earlier? No, we try to pick the best time for most parts of the world, and of course it will be more convenient to some people than to others.
It's difficult.
Yeah, but it's like the time we have right now, it's morning in America, it's afternoon in Europe and Africa, and it's evening in Asia, exactly. And Oceania as well.
Well, it might even be night there. I'm not sure if we've got any Australians here.
I think it's like, it depends on where in Australia you are. I think like the west coast is a little bit after midnight now, I guess.
Something like that. I don't know. I don't know exactly, but it's
Yeah, I think
it's
it's
just past midnight in Malaysia.
Yeah, I think that's the same time it is in Western Australia, but also Taiwan, where our headquarters are. 6-hour time difference, so easy calculation for us. Frostbite is asking, which board is better, the X570 Ace or the X570 Tomahawk? Depends on what you want. In terms of expandability, the X570 Ace is definitely a step up compared to the X570 Tomahawk. Both have a very good VRM design. Tomahawk is more affordable, but for example, will give you fewer M.2 slots, will give you fewer RGB features. So yeah, the main differences are in terms of feature set.
Yeah. So it's not. I see a lot of questions about people asking which one is better, and usually it's not really a question of which one is like objectively better. There are differences, and it really depends on what you expect and need a board to do.
Yeah.
That really decides which one is the better choice for you. But it's not necessarily that one is better than the other.
It also really much depends on what you want to do on it. Like, for example, if you want to run SLI, then the Ace is the only option if you're going to pick between the Tomahawk and the Ace, because the Tomahawk does not have SLI support. So it really much depends on the feature set and what you need from that feature set.
Yeah.
Another major difference in between the previous generation motherboards and the new generation motherboards is the PCB, and this has very much to do with the signal strength that is needed for PCI-express Gen 4, but it also helps with heat dissipation. So we, for example, have 2 ounce thickened copper on the PCBs on, for example, our new B550 motherboards. This was not yet present on our B450 motherboards. So even with the same VRM design, you will have lower temperatures on a B550 board than a B450 board. So next to already having a better VRM design technically in terms of power stages and stuff like that, also the PCB will help to cool better on B550. And of course will give you the better signal strength that you need for PCI-express Gen 4. So that's also quite a big difference in between those generations. M.2 shield Frozr, we already had M.2 shield on many B450 boards, but on, let me show you right here, our Tomahawk does have it, but for example the B550 or B450 Gaming Pro Carbon AC, you have the regular M.2 shield Frozr, which is relatively thin. The regular M.2 shield, sorry, the M.2 shield Frozr is quite a lot thicker. I'm not sure if you will be able to see it properly from the side, but these are relatively thick heatsinks, and that is of course needed for higher end SSDs that tend to get a bit warmer, Gen 4 SSDs that tend to get a bit warmer, and to avoid thermal throttling from those SSDs, the M.2 cooling has been increased a little bit on the newer generations. Also, for example, all B550 motherboards come with at least one M.2 shield Frozr. So not always on the secondary slot, but always on the primary Gen 4 slot. Whereas on a more entry-level B450 boards, you will not have M.2 shield at all. Peter?
Yeah.
Can I have my slide?
No. Sorry, I was trying to monitor the chat if there's any good questions as well.
If you monitor, then I will talk a little. We already talked a little bit about this shortly because we got a question. Why is there a fan on the MPG B550i Gaming Edge Wi-Fi? And that is because of the M.2 slot underneath. M.2 SSDs can get quite hot nowadays, especially Gen 4. If you want to avoid throttling in smaller cases, then a fan is a perfect solution for that. But of course, you don't want a fan to spin if it's not necessary. That's why it also supports zero Frozr technology to make sure if it's absolutely silent if it doesn't need to spin.
Yep.
Then, one of my favorite features and a huge difference in between the previous generation and the current generation. Because many B550 and also X570 motherboards support pre-installed I/O shielding. So this is a regular I/O shield. This is, for example, the one that you will get with the B450 Tomahawk Max. So it will be included in the box, but it's a separate shield. And with separate parts, you can of course lose them, and I'm very good at that.
Or forget to install them.
Or forget to install them, because you have to put them in your case first, and then yeah, you will probably not be very happy if you just installed your motherboard and you find out that you forgot to put in the I/O shield.
Because you have to then take everything out again.
Exactly. But another benefit of a pre-installed I/O shield is that it offers better ESD protection, so that's electrostatic discharge. So if, for example, your computer case, for whatever reason, gets a shock, it will protect your motherboard better from that shock than a regular I/O shield would. So it's convenient, both in terms of installation and the fact that you cannot lose it, but it will also protect your motherboard a little bit better. So also this is something you will find on, for example, B550. You will find this on all gaming models apart from the Bazooka, but all other gaming models. So if they either have the MAG or MPG prefix, then they will have a pre-installed I/O shield. And you will also find it on the higher end X570 boards.
The fix is saying, you say shield, I say finger slicer. I see you've had the pleasure of running your finger.
Do you know those old CPU coolers or old chipset heatsinks?
Yeah.
Those were sharp.
I mean, there are some sharp edges on some of these parts. Unfortunately, I don't know if maybe it'd be like an idea to make a motherboard that's all like rounded edges, so it's like user friendly to install. But yeah, I don't know. It does happen sometimes, unfortunately, but I think it's already become a lot better, since we now there are all the covers on the motherboard, so a lot of the components are covered, and you can't really cut yourself on that too much, but it can still happen.
And there are no exposed finned heat sinks anymore. So for example, on some of our motherboards you will find a fin stacked heatsink, but it's usually not as prominently like in a looping or something with the blades sticking out, because then when you were installing your CPU cooler and you touch them with your hand or your knuckles, you would cut them basically.
Yes, you would get a nice red color on your motherboards. Funny story, that's actually how we started the gaming brand. No, just kidding. That's why PCBs were always red in the past for MSI motherboards. It was just engineer blood. Yeah, and we called it passion. No, I'm just kidding. Hemlock's asking, will Ryzen 3 4350G have discount on Black Friday? For now, the 4350G will not be available as a separate component. It will only be part of a full system. I don't know how that will be by Black Friday. That will depends on AMD, of course. Yeah. So I have no idea. Joe Brown's asking, why did it take about 40 years to invent built-in I/O shields? How long did it take to invent the wheel? Yeah, I it's a good question. I guess a lot of people didn't really consider it like a big enough problem or issue that it actually needed to be addressed or changed. But it's often like that with new technology, right? You never missed it until you have it, and then it's like, why didn't I have that before? How did I ever live without it? Like, people were not missing the internet in the past, and now how would you live without the internet? It's it's just how it goes. Yeah. Which B450 board is best for Ryzen 5 3500? Do you mean like the 3500X that's, for example, available in the Asian region? Because in many regions that CPU is not available. But I would say, like, if you're going for B450 Tomahawk Max is a really nice choice for a CPU like that. B450M Mortar is also a really nice choice for a CPU like that. Depends a bit on what you want to do. If you want to overclock, if you want to overclock it heavily, B550 might be worth it. Homo Sapiens is asking, is there any news on X570 or X570 Tomahawk? What kind of news are you looking for? Maybe we can help. X570 Tomahawk? So this one? Yeah, he's asking if there's any news about it, but I'm wondering what specifically are you looking for? What news are you looking for? Because maybe we can help. I don't know. I have news for you. It's a really nice motherboard. It's just in. Yeah? Anyway. But if it's like on availability, it should be quite well available in most regions now. Yeah. Of course, it depends per region when it would be available. But I think now in most regions it should be available.
If it's not available yet in your region, please check with your local retailer.
Yeah.
They should probably be able to give you a better indication of when you can expect it. Is there going to be a Ryzen 4th gen processors that require discrete graphics?
Or is it going to be just APUs? That's a good question.
Yeah, 4th gen is a little bit, can be a little bit confusing because the 4000 series APUs are using the same CPU architecture as the 3000 series CPUs.
Yeah. So what is 4th gen? If you're talking about 4000 series, then anyway, if you mean like like Zen 2, I guess is the right description, right? If that is 4th gen to you, then the 3000 series is already 4th gen. So yes, they are already here and you can already get them.
And if it's about like the next generation for CPUs, of course, I cannot give you any details on that yet.
No.
Other than, of course, there will be Zen 3 architecture, which was already announced by AMD. And for example, if you have a 400 series max model motherboard, you will definitely have support for that as well. But of course, you will not be able to use all features like already with the 3000 series CPUs, because on B450 you can, for example, not use PCI-Express Gen 4. So even though you can usually use newer CPUs on all the motherboards, depending on what you want, it's not always the best idea.
I think we can continue the story a bit because we're.
Let's talk a bit about the flash BIOS
running
button.
Quite late.
We had it on some B450 motherboards. All B550 motherboards have this, and also all MSI X570 motherboards have this. And this is extremely convenient. For example, in the future, if you want to upgrade, you just put in a USB stick with the right BIOS file. You plug in your power supply, and you press the button to flash your BIOS. So no need to install a CPU, no need to install memory, no need to install a graphics card. So extremely easy. And also if you buy, for example, a motherboard like this with a future CPU and there is no out-of-the-box compatibility for it, you don't need to get your hands on an older CPU to be able to flash your BIOS first before you can use your new CPU.
This is going to be one of those things that you just mentioned, like, you know, until this came along, people didn't miss it, but now that you can do this, it's probably going to be something like, how did we ever do without this? Because it's just such a big difference.
But it was not always an issue, because it's especially now with the AMD AM4 longevity promise that they made, because they used the AM4 socket for quite a number of generations.
True.
And this also means that you can combine different generations motherboards and CPUs. So there's not always out-of-the-box support. And especially if you buy a motherboard with the CPU that it doesn't support out of the box, it can be a real hassle to arrange a CPU just to flash your motherboard. Yeah. So this just makes it a whole lot easier.
Exactly.
And this is on all some B450 boards also have this, but not all of them. But on all MSI B550 and all MSI X570 motherboards, you will find the flash BIOS button. Then memory, and this has to do with several things. The CPU and the motherboard, because the 3rd generation AMD Ryzen processors, the Zen 2 architecture, which you will also find on the 4000 series APUs. The memory controller on that is a lot better than the memory controller on the previous generations. So we can see that the Zen 2 processors can reach way higher memory clock speeds than Zen and Zen Plus architecture processors. But another difference is that B550 and X570, they have better PCBs, higher quality PCBs for better signal quality. That has to do, of course, also with PCI-Express Gen 4, but this also benefits your like maximum memory frequency that you can achieve. So we already saw, for example, the new Ryzen 7 Pro 4750G running at our MEG X570 Godlike motherboard at 6118 megahertz. So that's an insane memory speed. Of course, this is with LN2 cooling. You will not be able to just do that at home with air cooling. But even in a regular setup, it will give you way higher memory frequencies than the previous generation. So if you want to achieve those maximum memory frequencies, you will need, of course, a Zen 2 based either CPU or APU combined with a 500 series motherboard, so either B550 or X570. So that's quite a big difference in between the previous generation and the current generation. Another new feature that you will find on certain B550 motherboards, for example, the model I have right here, the ITX model, is 2.5 gigabit LAN. This is the Realtek 2.5 gigabit LAN. It does not have any issues. It's very fast, very convenient. Also, with when newer routers nowadays, newer switches, more and more are launched with 2.5 gigabit LAN. So if you want to have that maximum data transfer, then it's definitely a nice addition. Especially because we've been having 1 gigabit LAN for so long now, and Wi-Fi was basically getting faster than wired LAN in most situations. So now with 2.5 gigabit LAN, we're all ready for the future. Then Wi-Fi 6 connectivity. Most B550 motherboards that have Wi-Fi have Wi-Fi 6 connectivity. You will find some models that still have AC, but on the 400 series motherboards, you could only find AC models. And when you compare AC with Wi-Fi 6, so Wi-Fi 5 with Wi-Fi 6, or Wi-Fi AC to Wi-Fi AX, it's just how we call it, new name, old name. You get approximately 3 times the bandwidth, but more importantly, especially for gamers, is that the latency is way lower, because that was always one of the downsides of using Wi-Fi for online gaming.
Compared to a wired connection.
Yeah, definitely. Like the latency was usually quite a bit worse. And in that sense, Wi-Fi 6 is quite a big step up compared to Wi-Fi 5. Of course, there's also backwards compatible, so if you have Wi-Fi 5/Wi-Fi AC equipment, it will still work with a Wi-Fi 6 motherboard. But if you happen to have new Wi-Fi 6 networking, then you can definitely benefit from this. This you can find on, for example, B550 motherboards, certain models, but also on certain X570 models. Then we already touched on this. We got a question in chat. Why don't B550 motherboards have front USB Type-C?
No.
Well, they
we
all
have
have
to be fair.
it.
They didn't say front Type-C. They just asked
Type-C.
about Type-C. But
well, they do. All have front Type-C, and I'm not sure if all have Type-C in the back. I think most.
Most probably will.
Yeah.
It's a thing these days. So.
Yeah, it's but it's like if we have those 2 ITX models. As you can see here, you don't have any front Type-C header, but nowadays more and more cases use front USB Type-C. And to use that, you will need this connector. And this you will find on any B550 MSI B550 motherboard.
Yeah. And most of them will also have, on the rear I/O panel.
Yeah, right there.
There you go.
And this is also, for example, not yet present on the B450i motherboard, where you'll just see Type A USB connectors.
Yeah. There we
go. If you're going to build a new rig and there is a difference in price, would you go for B550? Like if you compare it to B450 or X570? But either way, it depends on what you want. If you will benefit from choosing a certain mother or chipset level, basically. Yeah. If you're not going to use Gen 4, if you're only going to use like a 3000 series CPU, then in most situations, and not going to overclock it big time, then in most situations B450 will be enough. If you want to do, more extensive overclocking, if you want to have PCI-Express Gen 4, if you want to have the latest connectivity, stuff like that, then B550, it's a good step up, I would say.
Dirk is asking, my main question is, or would be, why are there so few USB ports? Well then, how many is enough? How many do you need? Also, I mean, this was an ITX motherboard, right? So you obviously it's smaller, you have less space, so you have fewer connectors. But I mean, what is the USB count on like one of our bigger motherboards?
For example, here I have X570 Tomahawk.
There you go.
There you go.
1, 2, 3,
so you
4,
have like
5,
8
6,
USB
7,
connectors.
Yeah, 8 including the
7
Type-C.
or 7 Type A and 1 Type-C.
Yeah, and then you can of course connect additional USB
Yeah, you also
connectors.
have headers. You actually have multiple headers, so you have 2 USB. these are the 5 gigabit per second front headers, so the regular type A ones.
Yeah.
If you want, you can also use one of these headers, for example, for a bracket on the rear side of the case, and one for the front USB. And then there is also the Type-C connector on the front. So yeah, you can get quite a lot of USB ports.
TD Kid, I have to agree with you here. When is enough of anything? When you run out?
And also, if you have, for example, the ITX board, if you want to go over a certain number of USB ports, you have to use separate USB controllers because you run into limitations. And as you can see, the board is not very big, so you have very limited space also to put in more controllers. Yeah. And also, you would have to leave other stuff out.
So it's a choice, and for this, especially for a small board, it makes sense that you're not going to put like that many USB connectors on it.
Yeah, and like Madman2Tech also mentions, there's always USB hubs.
Yeah, true.
Of course, in some situations, you want to have it connected directly to your PC to get the maximum speed. Mostly, yeah. But like if you're going to connect a mouse or a keyboard or a webcam. Most webcams, I should say. If you have a 4K webcam, different story. But a lot of hardware you can simply put on a USB hub. Yeah. But yeah, I think in general there should be enough USB ports for most users. Yes. Of course, adding more USB would also increase the cost, and if most people will not use more USB ports than what we offer now, then it's usually not worth it to put in more. Yeah. So that's basically how it works. Yeah. Another difference in between, for example, B450 and B550 is that all B550 motherboards come with addressable RGB lighting. So that's the J Rainbow header on the motherboard. Some B450 models already have this, like for example the B450 Gaming Pro Carbon AC or the Gaming Pro Carbon Max. They already have a J Rainbow header. But for example, the motherboard I have right here, the B450i Gaming Plus AC, this one, for example, only has the JRGB headers, whereas on the new B550 model, you will get, let me see where it is on this model. I
doubt you're going to be able to see it on the camera, but...
Yeah, it should be right here in the corner. You have the 3-pin J Rainbow header. And addressable RGB basically means that your external RGB components can display multiple colors at the same time. So you can have those rainbow effects and stuff like that. With J Rainbow, you can only have one static color, so you can cycle through it, for example, but you cannot show them simultaneously. So the newer generation, they usually have more J Rainbow headers. Depends on the model, how many you get, but all of them have at least one J Rainbow header. And the higher end models will even have multiple. For example, 2 J Rainbow. On certain models, you will even get a J Corsair header, specifically for addressable RGB on Corsair components. Another nice feature is the easy LED control switch that you can find on certain motherboards, where you will be able to easily switch off the RGB lighting on the motherboard. Maybe I can show you on a running system where I actually have the... Let me see if
I can
grab the camera.
What? Careful. Yeah. Don't drop us.
I will not drop you. The cable is not very long though.
You say that.
I'm not sure if you can see the RGB lighting right here. It's maybe a little bit hard to see with all those lights.
Yeah.
Like in between, I think you can see it. But there's a nice small switch on the motherboard, and you can just easily switch it off and back on. So if you're not into RGB, it's a really easy way to switch it off without the need for any additional software.
Yeah. If you already know when you're building it and you don't want to bother with the software, then at least you have a way of turning it off and it'll stay off.
Yeah, no need to go into the BIOS, no need to go into the software. Yeah. You can easily switch it off. So yeah, that was it from my side. I have one more thing I would like to show you. If you're still in doubt, should I go for a B450 motherboard? Should I go for a B550 motherboard? Or should I go for an X570 motherboard? If you go to MSI.com, on the top, if you click on what's new, then you see our blog articles. And right here we have a very nice blog about B450 versus B550 versus X570. And there you can find a lot of detailed information. You can, for example, find the different CPU support on different chipsets. So you can check if the CPU you want to buy is compatible with a certain motherboard you want to buy. It will also show you some of the differences in feature sets that you will find in between them. For example, here also the number of M.2 slots, the LAN ports you will get. In some situations you even get dual LAN. Here also more information about the power design, how many phases it has, and the power connectors you have. So if you go to MSI.com, go to the What's New section on top, then you go to the blog articles, and there you will find it. So make sure to check it out. And then I think it is time for our big winner of today.
Is it time?
It's time.
Guys, are you ready?
Because this person will win the MSI MAG B550 Tomahawk motherboard, which is this motherboard right here.
That's right.
You'll get a brand new one, by the way, in the box. So not specifically this one,
Not
but you will get this type of motherboard. But a brand new one. And you will also get the MAG Core Liquid 360R all-in-one liquid cooler with, of course, a 360mm radiator. Of course, has all the nice addressable RGB lighting. So I think it's a cool combination to win.
Yes.
I hope you guys are excited. I think we have a winner. Okay, our winner for the motherboard and the water cooling is Webax. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly. WEBAX. Congratulations,
Congrats.
you won. Yeah, Webax.
Webax. I don't know how to pronounce
Webax.
it.
Yeah, Webax. I think Webax.
WEBAX.
Congratulations, you won the MAG B550 Tomahawk motherboard and the MAG Core Liquid 360R all-in-one liquid cooler.
Congrats. We're gonna get in touch with you. So yeah, I don't know if you're still in the chat. If you are, congrats. Go crazy.
Indeed. Keep an eye on your mailbox. We will send you an email and
make sure you get your prizes as soon as possible.
Exactly. So that was it for today.
Yes.
Next week we're going to listen.
Ja is actually gonna be talking about a new thing that we have indeed, or that's I don't know if it's already on some products or if it's still coming up. But yeah, there is some really cool software, MSI's AI Sound Tune.
A new audio feature.
Exactly, and it's gonna be really spicing up your audio, making it more crystal clear.
And also like removing background noise and stuff like that to really make sure there's no.
You know, if you got your family running in the background or stuff like that.
Yeah, for example, you have a baby, you can filter your baby.
Maybe your mother or your wife or you know whoever is like vacuuming the house and you're trying to concentrate on your game. It really sucks. So it'd be nice if you can just filter that out, right? So anyway, yeah, that's what next week's stream is going to be about.
So make sure to check it out. Same place, same time. Ja will be here. I don't know who else will be here. Maybe Peter, maybe me, maybe Eric.
Maybe we'll filter ourselves out.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Guys, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you learned something. I hope it was useful. I hope you liked it.
Yes.
If you still have any suggestions for the ITX stream that is coming up, make sure to drop them in the comments underneath the video. Thank you so much for watching today and hope to see you again next week.
All right, guys. Thank you and see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.